Welcome, friend. The night is already here when you arrive. Not the kind of night that announces itself loudly, but one that has been slowly settling for hours, sliding between buildings, resting on rooftops, slipping quietly into the spaces where the day used to be. By the time you notice it, the night has already made itself at home. You are not late. You are exactly on time. Somewhere outside, a final door closes. A distant motor fades. The world does not stop all at once. It softens layer by layer until only the quieter things remain. The things that don't need attention to exist. You take a breath without thinking about it. It feels different now, slower, deeper, as if your body understands something your mind has not yet named, that this is not a moment for effort or solving or becoming anything more than you already are. Tonight is long, and that is not a problem. In the long night, nothing needs to be finished. Nothing needs to be proven. The questions you carried through the day are allowed to loosen their grip one by one and rest somewhere beyond reach. You do not have to push them away. You don't even have to answer them. They will quiet on their own. This is not a story meant to wake you up. It is not here to challenge you, motivate you, or change you. It is here to keep you company. Imagine a road stretching ahead, dimly lit, not demanding to be walked quickly. The air is cool. The edges of things are softened by shadow. You are not searching for a destination, only moving gently forward step by unhurried step. That is how this night will unfold. You may listen closely. You may drift in and out. You may remember parts or none at all. All of that is fine. There is no right way to be here. The long night has room for wandering thoughts, for half-formed images, for moments when you forget you were listening, and moments when you feel fully present again. It does not rush you towards sleep, but it knows sleep will come, eventually, as it always does. You might notice how tired you actually are, not in a heavy, overwhelming way, but in a truthful one. The kind of tiredness that comes from having lived through a full day, carrying small things and large ones, whether you meant to or not. You don't need to set them down all at once. You can place them gently at the edge of the night, knowing they will still be there tomorrow if they truly matter. For now, you are allowed to rest inside the space between doing and dreaming. The stories you will hear tonight are simple. They belong to ordinary lives, quiet moments, small decisions that never made headlines. There are no grand revelations waiting at the end of them, no dramatic turning points, only clarity slowly revealed, like eyes adjusting to darkness. As the night deepens, your breathing may begin to follow a steadier rhythm. In and out, without instruction, without effort. Your body knows how to do this. It has been practicing all your life. You can trust it. Outside, the long night continues to stretch. Inside, something eases. The distance between thought and feeling grows softer, less defined. You don't need to hold yourself together so tightly anymore. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to defend against. This is simply a night to be lived through slowly. And you are not alone in it. Let yourself stay here. Let the edges blur. Let the night carry you forward gently into the first story. The night continues to unfold around you, unbothered by clocks or expectations. If you listen carefully, you may notice how different the silence feels now. It is not empty, it is layered. Beneath it lives the faint hum of distant life, electric lines, sleeping buildings, wind brushing against unseen corners of the world. Nothing calls for your attention. Yet everything is quietly present. You allow your shoulders to loosen. They have been holding more than you realized. All day, perhaps even longer than a day, you have been bracing against noise, against decisions, against the subtle pressure to keep moving forward. Now in this long night, that effort is no longer required. The darkness does not ask anything of you. It does not judge how far you've come or how far you still feel you need to go. It simply exists. You may feel a gentle heaviness beginning to settle in your body. Not the heaviness of exhaustion that overwhelms, but the kind that grounds. The kind that lets you know you are supported by the chair, the bed, the floor beneath you, by gravity itself. You do not have to hold yourself up anymore. Thoughts still appear, of course. They wander through like late travelers, unsure whether to stay or continue on. Some bring fragments of the day, unfinished conversations, small worries, half-remembered plans. You don't need to engage with them. You can let them pass. They will find their own way out. Tonight is not about resolution. It is about allowing. Allowing the mind to slow in its own time. Allowing the body to return to its natural rhythm, allowing yourself to be exactly as you are without editing. Imagine the night as a wide open field. There is no path you must follow across it. You can stand still, you can lie down, you can drift wherever the ground feels softest beneath you. Nothing is wrong with pausing. In the quiet, you may begin to notice subtle sensations. You usually overlook the warmth of your hands, the rise and fall of your chest, the way your breath feels cooler as it enters, warmer as it leaves. These are small anchors keeping you gently connected to the present moment without demanding focus. You don't have to concentrate, just notice. The long night has a way of stretching time. Minutes no longer stack neatly on top of one another. They widen, they blur. What felt urgent earlier loses its sharpness. What felt heavy becomes manageable, simply because it is no longer being carried forward. This is the gift of slowing down. You are not falling behind. You are returning. The stories ahead will not rush you. They will move at the pace of footsteps on an empty road, at the speed of lantern light, swaying gently in the dark. Each one will arrive, linger briefly, and fade, without insisting on being remembered. You don't need to listen for meaning. If something stays with you, it will do so quietly. If nothing does, that is just as well. Sleep does not require understanding. It only asks for permission. You may already feel the edges of awareness softening, as if the night itself is wrapping around your thoughts, smoothing them into something less defined. This is not something you have to make happen. It happens when you stop trying. You are allowed to drift, allowed to miss words, allowed to forget sentences. Allowed to sink into that gentle space where stories turn into feelings and feelings slowly dissolve into rest. The long night is patient. It knows that rest cannot be forced, only welcomed. So stay here a little longer. Let the weight of the day continue to slide away piece by piece. Let the quiet do what it has always known how to do. When the first story begins, you do not need to be fully awake to hear it, and you do not need to be fully asleep to rest. You are simply moving from one state into another, smoothly, naturally, without effort. The night is wide enough to hold you, and there is no need to hurry. The road begins to climb long before most people notice it. At first, it is only a gentle curve away from the village, passing between quiet houses and low stone walls. But after the last home disappears behind a bend, the incline becomes more honest. The ground hardens, the air cools, the mountain no longer pretends to be easy. Every evening, just as the sky begins to dim, a man walks this road alone. He is not young, though, not so old that his steps have slowed completely. His back is slightly bent, not from weakness, but from years of repeating the same movement. Lifting, setting down, lifting again. In his hand, he carries a long metal pole with a small lantern attached to the end. The lantern is simple, glass, a wick, a steady flame, nothing decorative. He lights it before the sun has fully disappeared, when the colors in the sky are still undecided. He knows from experience that if he waits too long, the darkness arrives all at once, and the road becomes less forgiving. As he walks, he stops at regular intervals. Each stop is familiar. A small stone marker, a bend where rainwater gathers, a place where the path narrows and drops away sharply to one side. At each point, he sets the lantern into a metal hook, anchored deep into the rock. The light spreads outward in a soft circle, never too bright. Just enough to reveal the shape of the road. Just enough to prevent a misstep. He does this every night. Few people see him. Most travelers pass through the mountain during the day. Merchants, pilgrims, farmers moving between villages. By the time evening falls, the road is usually empty. On some nights, no one walks it at all. Still, the man lights the lanterns. He does not know who will come. Sometimes it is a single traveler, late and tired, grateful for the steady glow ahead. Sometimes it is no one. Sometimes the wind extinguishes a flame, and he must return later to relight it. He does not complain. When asked why he continues this work, why he climbs the mountain every night when the road is often unused, he offers no elaborate answer. He simply says that darkness does not announce who it will trouble. Better to be ready. As he moves from one lantern to the next, his breath settles into a quiet rhythm. In, out, in, out. The sound of his steps blends with the evening insects and the faint rustle of leaves. There is no urgency in him, only consistency. The mountain watches silently. This work does not make him known. No one waits to thank him at the top. There is no sign bearing his name. The lanterns burn without credit. And yet night after night the road is gentler because of him. You imagine walking that path yourself. How different it would feel to see the small lights ahead, each one. A quiet assurance that someone has already been here, thinking of the darkness before it arrived. The man reaches the highest point of the road where the final lantern waits. He sets it carefully, shielding the flame from the wind with his hand until it steadies. For a moment he stands there, not admiring his work, not counting the lights, simply breathing in the mountain air as the night fully settles around him. Then, without ceremony, he turns back the way he came. On his way down the road, looks different. The lanterns are now lit, each one holding a small pocket of warmth against the growing dark. The spaces between them remain shadowed, but the shadows no longer feel endless. They are measured, understandable. The man walks past the lights without lingering. He does not stop to check how far their glow reaches. He does not test whether they are bright enough. He trusts the work he has already done. If one fails, he will notice it tomorrow, or the night after that. Perfection has never been part of the task. Halfway down the mountain, he pauses not because he must, but because the body sometimes asks for stillness. He rests his hand against the cool stone wall beside the path and listens. There is no sound of footsteps behind him, no voices ahead, only the quiet confidence of the lights continuing to burn without supervision. He thinks briefly of the many nights when no one walked this road at all. Nights when the lanterns burned until dawn, for no eyes but the stars. Nights when the wind carried their light into emptiness. And yet, those nights did not feel wasted, because the purpose of the lanterns was never to be seen. It was to be ready. The man learned this slowly over years. At first he noticed disappointment creeping in, a subtle tightening when no traveler appeared, a faint wish to be acknowledged, to know that his effort had mattered. But the mountain taught him something else. It taught him that care does not require an audience. Rain still falls on paths no one walks. Trees still grow on slopes no one climbs. Light still matters even when no one is there to notice it. Somewhere along the way, the work changed him. He became less concerned with outcomes, less interested in proof. The lighting of each lantern became complete in itself, and action finished the moment it was done, regardless of what followed. You feel the weight of that lesson settle quietly. How many times have you waited for your effort to be recognized before allowing it to feel worthwhile? How often have you measured your care by the response it received? The mountain road offers another way to do what is needed because it is needed, to give without calculating the return, to light the path simply because darkness exists. When the man reaches the edge of the village, the last lantern is already far above him, its glow barely visible now. He does not turn to look. His work for the night is finished. At home, he washes his hands, eats a simple meal, and rests. Tomorrow he will wake early. Tomorrow the sun will rise and the road will look ordinary again, just stone and dirt and curves carved into the mountain. Most people will never know what it looks like in the dark, and that is fine. As you sit with this story, something softens inside you. A permission you didn't know you were waiting for. The permission to offer your own small lights without needing them to be admired. A kind word given quietly. A task done carefully. A moment of patience no one applauds. These things matter, not because they are noticed, but because they make the path gentler. Somewhere tonight a road is lit that no one will walk. Somewhere a light burns without witness, and still it is enough. You carry that thought with you as the story fades, not as a lesson to remember, but as a feeling to rest inside. The mountain grows quiet again. The night is thin and quiet when the kitchen finally cools. The fire has been out for some time, yet the scent of cooked rice still lingers in the air, soft, faint, almost comforting. On the wooden table sits a single bowl. The porridge inside has long since lost its steam. A pale skin has formed on the surface, delicate and unbroken. It has been waiting. Earlier, the bowl was meant to be eaten while it was warm. That was the plan. The rice had been rinsed carefully, the water measured by habit, rather than counting. Everything done the way it always had been. But plans are light things. They shift easily the way a curtain shifts when a window is cracked open. Someone knocked at the door. It was not an emergency. Just a neighbor passing through, carrying news that did not need to be delivered urgently, but still felt important enough to share before morning. Words stretched longer than expected. A story inside a story. A few polite pauses, a few small laughs that arrived late, as if even the laughter didn't want to wake the house. By the time the door closed again, the porridge had cooled. The person who now stands in the kitchen notices this immediately. There is a pause, not frustration exactly, just a moment of recognition. The mind offers alternatives: reheat it, add something, make it better, turn it into the version you originally pictured, but the bowl remains untouched. Instead, they sit down. The spoon dips into the porridge and lifts slowly. The texture is thicker, now heavier. It does not move as it did before. The first bite is cool, almost bland. Not unpleasant. Just plain honest and a little stubborn, like food that refuses to perform. They eat anyway. Outside, the night presses gently against the window. Somewhere, a dog barks once and then stops. The house settles into its familiar sounds, wood contracting, the soft tick of cooling metal, the faint breath of a hallway that no one is walking through. With each bite, something shifts. The expectation of warmth dissolves. The comparison between what was planned and what is fades. The porridge becomes simply food. Nourishment, enough. There is a memory, uninvited but gentle, of other meals eaten without ceremony. Bread shared in silence. Leftovers eaten standing up. A bowl carried to the doorstep to watch the rain. Simple things that filled the body without asking for applause. The bowl empties slowly. No satisfaction rushes in. No disappointment remains. Just a quiet sense of having been sustained and the small surprise of realizing you can be content without conditions. When the spoon is set down, the person notices how calm the room feels. How little was actually required for this moment to be complete. Cold porridge does not impress. It does not comfort in the obvious way, but it asks for nothing in return. You can feel the simplicity of that truth settling into you. The way some things are enough precisely because they do not demand to be more. The bowl is rinsed and placed upside down to dry. The table is wiped clean. Nothing lingers except the faint trace of rice in the air and the steady rhythm of breath. The night continues. Later, when the house is dark and the kitchen exists only as a remembered space, the bowl returns to the mind. Not as an object, but as a feeling. There was no disappointment in finishing it. No sense of having settled for less. The porridge did not need to be warm to fulfill its purpose. It had already done what food is meant to do: quiet. The hunger steady the body and let the night proceed without negotiation. This understanding arrives gently. It does not announce itself as wisdom. It feels more like relief, like loosening your grip on something you didn't realize you were squeezing. So much of the day is spent adjusting, correcting temperature, tone, timing, reheating conversations in the mind, reworking moments that cooled too quickly or didn't arrive as expected. There is a constant effort to bring things back to the way they were supposed to be, as if supposed to is a rule written somewhere reliable. But the long night doesn't care about supposed to. The bowl of cold porridge offers another possibility, that some moments are complete, even when they no longer match the plan. You think about how often you hesitate when things aren't ideal. How easily comfort becomes a condition rather than a bonus. Warmth, recognition, ease, these become requirements, and when they are missing, satisfaction withdraws as if it has been personally offended. The porridge didn't do that. It did not resist being eaten. It did not demand improvement before it could nourish. It simply was. In that small acceptance, something larger opens. A recognition that not every moment needs to be optimized to be meaningful. Not every experience needs to be adjusted to deserve your presence. Sometimes good enough is not a compromise. It is a doorway into peace. Sometimes enough arrives quietly and waits. The house remains still as the night deepens. The body grows heavier beneath blankets. Breathing slows, settling into a rhythm that no longer listens for interruption. Even your thoughts, those busy little planners, begin to wander with less confidence, as if they too have decided to clock out. You return again briefly to the image of the bowl. Clean now, empty, turned upside down to dry. It has already been forgotten by the kitchen, and yet it has done its work. This is how many things move through life, without ceremony, without being remembered. They support you moment by moment and then disappear back into ordinary silence. A meal that isn't perfect, a kindness that isn't noticed, a patient choice that no one praises. They sustain more than we realize. The night accepts this truth easily, the way it accepts the moon behind thin clouds, still there, still steady, even when softened. And as sleep begins to arrive, you do too. Not as a victory, not as an achievement, just as a natural return, as simple as setting down a spoon. You do not have to force anything. If the mind brings up tomorrow, you can let tomorrow wait at the edge of the room like a coat hanging on a peg. If the mind brings up yesterday, you can let yesterday sit down quietly and stop talking for once. Neither one needs to be solved tonight. Tonight is allowed to be plain, like a bowl that cooled while life happened. And in that plainness, you find a kind of steady comfort. Less like a blanket, more like a clean floor beneath your feet. Reliable, unshowy, real. The long night holds you there for a moment, and then without effort, you begin to drift. The rain begins without warning. Not heavy at first, just a fine, steady fall that darkens the ground and softens the edges of the street. Most people notice it only when they feel the dampness on their sleeves or hear it tapping lightly against metal roofs. The old carpenter notices it immediately. He is already outside, standing beneath the narrow awning of his workshop. The door is open behind him, the smell of wood and dust drifting out into the wet air. In front of him sits a low wooden stool, one leg slightly uneven, its surface worn smooth by years of use. He runs his hand across it slowly. The stool belongs to no one important. It is not meant for sale. It has lived its life in kitchens, courtyards, and doorways, holding weight without complaint. When one leg began to loosen, it was carried here without urgency, placed quietly near the door. The carpenter lifts it with care. His movements are unhurried, practiced. Age has not weakened his hands so much as it has taught them restraint. He turns the stool over, studies the joint, presses gently where the wood has begun to separate. The rain grows heavier. Water darkens the ground in front of the shop, pooling in shallow shapes that change by the second. Anyone else might step back inside, wait for the weather to pass. The carpenter does not. He brings the stool closer to the doorway, just out of the rain's reach, and sits down. The light from inside falls across his hands, catching the fine lines in his skin and the pale dust clinging to his sleeves. He works slowly. There is no rush to finish before the rain ends. No concern for how long the repair might take. He cleans the joint, applies a small amount of glue, presses the wood together, and holds it there longer than necessary. Waiting is part of the work. Outside, the rain settles into a steady rhythm. The street empties, footsteps fade. The world narrows to the sound of water and the quiet concentration of his breathing. He remembers other days like this, repairing a table while storms passed unnoticed, fixing a door hinge long after the house around it had changed owners. Small acts of care that did not interrupt the weather or alter the course of the day. The stool does not resist him. It accepts the pressure, the patience, the time. When he finally sets it down, he does not test it immediately. He leaves it where it is, allowing the joint to rest, to decide its own strength. The rain continues. You can feel the calm of that moment, the absence of urgency, the permission to let things take as long as they take, the understanding that not every task needs to be completed quickly to be done well. The carpenter wipes his hands on a cloth and watches the rain for a while. He is not waiting for it to stop. He is simply letting it be. When the rain finally begins to soften, the carpenter does not look up right away. He remains seated, hands resting loosely on his knees, listening as the sound changes. The steady fall breaks into uneven drops. The rhythm loses its certainty. Water slips from the edge of the awning in slower intervals, each drop distinct, unhurried. He waits. The stool stands beside him, silent, newly repaired. The joint has settled into place, the glue doing its quiet work. There is no sign to indicate success yet. No assurance that it will hold when weight returns to it. The carpenter does not feel the need to check. Some things cannot be rushed even to confirm they are complete. He thinks of how often people come to him wanting speed. Chairs needed by morning, tables repaired quickly before guests arrive, shelves fixed just enough to last. He understands the urgency. He does not judge it, but he does not adopt it either. Wood remembers how it is treated. So do hands. So does time. Eventually, he lifts the stool again. Not abruptly, not with testing force. He places it on the ground, presses down gently, then sits. The stool holds without protest. The unevenness is gone. The weight distributes itself as it should. The carpenter exhales, barely noticeable. The work is done. He does not smile. There is no sense of triumph, only the quiet recognition that something has been returned to usefulness, that a small imbalance has been corrected without drama. Outside, the street begins to stir again. A distant door opens. Someone walks past, careful to avoid the remaining puddles. Life resumes without comment, as if nothing had paused at all. The carpenter sets the stool near the door, ready for its owner to retrieve whenever they remember. It may be today. It may be days from now. It does not matter. Care does not expire. As you sit with this moment, you may notice something easing inside you. The tension that comes from believing everything must be finished quickly, efficiently, visibly. The pressure to move on before something is fully settled. The carpenter offers another rhythm, one where patience is not delay but precision, where waiting is not wasted time but a part of the craft. The rain has already taught this lesson to the ground, soaking in, slowly leaving strength behind rather than surface shine. The carpenter closes his workshop door partway, not to shut the world out, but to narrow it. The scent of wood lingers. The air feels cooler, now clearer. He washes his hands and lets them rest. There is nothing more to adjust. The stool will go back into a kitchen, a courtyard, a doorway. It will hold weight again quietly. No one will think of the rain or the time it took to fix. No one will need to. That is how most good repairs live. Unnoticed, reliable, complete. The night receives this truth easily, and as the story fades, you may feel yourself settling too. Less concerned with speed, more willing to let things hold their shape before you move on. Some things only become steady when given enough time. The river is calm at this hour. Not perfectly still, but steady in the way old things often are. Its surface moves slowly, carrying small reflections of the sky without holding on to them. The far bank is already dim, the outlines of trees softening as evening settles in. At the edge of the water, a narrow boat waits. It is not new. The wood bears the marks of long-use scratches where ropes once rubbed a smoothness along the seat, shaped by years of shifting weight. The ferryman stands beside it, adjusting a line with practiced hands. He does this every day, morning, midday, evening. Whenever someone appears at the river's edge and waits without calling out, the ferryman does not ask questions. He does not ask where they are going, even though the answer is obvious. He does not ask how long they plan to stay on the other side or when they will return. And he never asks for names. People step into the boat, carrying all kinds of things. Baskets, small bags, bundles tied with string, sometimes nothing at all. Sometimes something heavy that requires the ferryman to steady the boat as they climb in. They sit quietly, facing forward. The ferryman pushes off with a long pole, guiding the boat into the current. The water accepts them without disturbance, parting gently around the hull. The crossing begins. Some passengers try to speak at first. They offer their names. They explain where they're from. They tell short stories as if the journey requires filling. The ferryman listens, politely nods once or twice, but does not respond with questions of his own. Eventually, most people fall silent. The river has a way of encouraging that. The sound of water against wood settles into a rhythm. The boat rocks slightly. Not enough to unsettle, just enough to remind you that movement is happening even when nothing appears to change. The ferryman watches the water adjusting his pole with small, precise motions. His eyes track subtle shifts in the current patterns that mean little to anyone else, but tell him exactly where to guide the boat. Names are not useful here. They do not help the crossing. They do not make the river gentler. What matters is balance, patience, attention. The boat glides steadily forward. Halfway across, the river widens. The far shore feels distant now, less certain. Some passengers shift in their seats, suddenly aware of the water beneath them. The ferryman remains calm. He has crossed this river thousands of times, in rain, in fog, in heat and cold. The river has carried joy and grief alike. It has taken people to weddings and funerals, to beginnings and endings. It does not care who they are. The ferryman learned long ago that knowing names does not make the work easier. It only adds weight. As the boat continues, you may feel something familiar in the silence. The relief of not having to introduce yourself. The quiet comfort of being carried without explanation. For a few minutes, you are only a passenger. And that is enough. As the boat nears the far bank, the river begins to narrow again. The current slows slightly, easing its grip. The ferryman adjusts his stance, planting the pole with a practiced certainty that comes from years of repetition. The motion is small, almost invisible, but it guides the boat precisely where it needs to go. The shore approaches without drama. No one announces arrival, no signal is given. The boat simply touches land wood, meeting earth with a soft, familiar sound. The ferryman steadies it, holding the side until the passenger steps out. There is a brief moment, always the same, when the passenger hesitates. Not because they are unsure of their footing, but because the crossing has created a quiet pause. A space where nothing was required of them. A space where they were carried without needing to explain themselves. Then the moment passes. They step onto the shore and continue on. Some thank the ferryman, some nod, some say nothing at all. He responds the same way every time, with a slight bow of the head, respectful and neutral. He does not watch them leave. He does not track their progress. The river releases them, and so does he. The boat drifts a short distance back from the shore as the ferryman prepares for the return crossing. He does not rush. There is no schedule pressing against him, no list of names to check off. The river will tell him when someone else is waiting. In the quiet between crossings, he rests the pole against the boat and looks out over the water. This is when thoughts sometimes arise. Not about the people he carries, but about the act of carrying itself. About the strange intimacy of helping someone cross a distance without needing to know who they are. About the trust that forms briefly and dissolves just as easily. The ferryman has learned to value that impermanence.
Names he discovered long ago tend to linger. They attach themselves to memory, invite stories, invite expectations. Without names, each crossing remains clean, complete, finished, the moment it ends. The river prefers it this way.
Water does not remember faces. It does not call out identities. It moves everything forward without distinction. When another passenger appears on the opposite bank, the ferryman notices immediately. A shift in posture, a stillness that means waiting. He guides the boat back across the pole, cutting cleanly through the water. The cycle continues. You may find yourself breathing more slowly as you sit with this rhythm. The steady back and forth, the simple task repeated without accumulation. There is comfort in work that does not demand remembrance. How often do you feel required to explain yourself before being helped? How many times have you offered your name, your history, your reasons, just to be carried a little way forward? The ferryman offers a quieter kindness. Here, you do not need to be known to be supported. You do not need to be remembered to be helped. You only need to arrive at the water's edge and wait. As the night deepens, the river grows darker. Reflections disappear. The crossing becomes a matter of feel rather than sight. The ferryman adjusts easily, relying on the knowledge in his hands. He has done this enough times to trust the process. Eventually, the river will rest. The crossings will pause until morning. The ferryman will secure the boat and walk home, his work complete without record. No names written down, no stories collected. Only the quiet certainty that for another day the river was crossed. You carry that feeling with you as the story fades, the lightness of not needing to be defined, the relief of being helped without condition. Sometimes the greatest kindness is not being remembered. It is being carried and then released exactly when the shore is reached. The shop is easy to miss. There is no sign hanging above the door. No painted letters, no lantern announcing its presence. The wooden frame is plain, the color softened by years of sun and rain. If you are not looking carefully, you might walk past it without noticing anything at all. Most people do. Those who find the tea shop usually aren't searching for it. They arrive by accident, drawn in by a pause in their steps, a moment of hesitation, a sense that they don't quite want to continue forward just yet. Inside, the air is warm, not heavy, just gently held. The scent of dried leaves and hot water settles quietly in the room. A low counter runs along one wall, polished smooth by countless hands, resting briefly, then moving on. A few small tables sit near the window, their surfaces marked by rings left from cups long gone. The owner does not greet you loudly. He looks up when the door opens, nods once, and returns to what he was doing. There is no rush to take an order, no expectation that you know what you want. The kettle hums softly in the background, steady and patient. People sit where they choose. Some come alone and take the seat closest to the window, watching the street outside without really seeing it. Others arrive in pairs, speaking quietly at first, then falling into silence as the tea is poured. No one asks how long you plan to stay. Tea arrives when it is ready, not before, not after. The owner pours with care, lifting the kettle, slowly letting the water settle the leaves before moving on to the next cup. There is no showmanship in it, just repetition done well. You notice how the room feels different from other places. There is no pressure to fill the silence, no background music trying to guide your mood. Conversations happen softly, if at all. When they end, they are allowed to end. The tea is simple, clear, warm, slightly bitter than smooth. It does not try to impress you. It does not carry a story about where it came from or why it is special. It is simply tea offered without explanation. You sip slowly. Outside, the street continues as it always has. People pass unaware of the quiet pocket they are missing. Inside, time stretches gently as if it has been asked to sit down for a while. Someone finishes their cup and leaves without ceremony. Another person takes their place. The rhythm remains unchanged. You realize how rarely you are in places that do not ask for your attention in exchange for comfort. How unusual it feels to be somewhere that does not measure your presence. The tea shop does not care who you are. It does not need you to return. It does not try to be remembered. It exists for those moments when continuing feels heavier than pausing. You sit with your cup until it cools slightly, then a little more. There is no need to rush. No one is waiting for your seat. When you finally stand, the owner nods again. Not a farewell, just an acknowledgement that you were here. Outside, the air feels cooler. The shop remains behind you, unmarked, unchanged, waiting quietly for whoever needs it next. When you walk away from the shop, it does not follow you. There is no lingering aroma clinging to your clothes. No card pressed into your hand, no thought urging you to return. The door closes softly behind you and the street resumes its familiar shape as if nothing unusual has happened. And yet something has shifted. Your steps feel less hurried. The tension that had been quietly directing you forward loosens its grip. You are not moving toward anything in particular now. You are simply moving. The tea settles warmly in your body, not in a dramatic way, just enough to remind you that you are here, that you have been held briefly, by a place that did not require explanation or exchange. The shop did not ask you to perform appreciation. It did not offer you an identity in return for comfort. It gave, and then it let go. Later that evening, when the day has fully dimmed and the night begins to stretch, the memory of the shop returns not vividly, but gently. Not as an image, but as a feeling of being allowed to sit without purpose. You realize how rare that permission is. Most places want something from you: attention, time, a decision. Even rest is often framed as preparation for what comes next. But the tea shop existed entirely outside of that exchange. It did not hurry you. It did not hold you. It simply made space. You think about how many moments in your life could be lighter if you treated them the same way. A conversation that does not need to be resolved. A pause that does not need justification. A kindness offered without expecting it to return. The tea shop teaches without teaching. It does not offer lessons on its walls. It does not explain itself. It just remains open quietly, without a sign. You imagine the owner there now rinsing cups, refilling jars, wiping the counter clean. The work is unremarkable steady. He does not prepare for a rush. He does not advertise for more guests. He trusts that those who need the shop will find it. As the night deepens, you find yourself breathing more slowly. The memory of warm tea, of quiet chairs, of unspoken understanding settles into your awareness, like a soft blanket, not heavy, just present. The world feels slightly less demanding, and when sleep begins to arrive, it does so easily. Not because you are exhausted, not because you have earned it, but because somewhere along the way you were reminded that rest does not always need a reason. Sometimes it only needs a place willing to remain quiet. The tea shop stays where it is, unmarked, unchanged, ready for the next person who happens to pause at the right moment. The courtyard is quiet in the late afternoon. Not silent, just softened. The kind of quiet that arrives when the heat of the day begins to ease and people retreat indoors, leaving the outside to breathe on its own. The ground is scattered with fallen leaves, some dry and curled, others still holding a trace of green. A child sits near the center of it all. They are not playing in the way adults expect play to look. There is no running, no shouting, no obvious game unfolding. Instead, the child moves slowly, deliberately picking up leaves one by one and placing them into small, uneven piles. One leaf, another, then another. They count quietly under their breath. Not because anyone asked them to, not because the number matters. They count because the act of counting feels right. Each leaf is examined briefly before being placed down. Some are wide and intact. Others are torn, their edges irregular. A few crumble slightly when touched, breaking apart before they can be added to a pile. The child pauses when that happens. They do not react with frustration. They simply adjust, letting the broken pieces fall where they may then continuing on. The count changes, but the rhythm does not. An adult watches from a distance. At first there is confusion. Why count leaves? What purpose does it serve? The courtyard will be swept soon. The leaves will be gone by morning. Whatever number is reached will not matter. But the child does not seem concerned with tomorrow. They are fully occupied with what is in front of them. A breeze moves through the courtyard, lifting a few leaves and carrying them to a new corner. The child notices, stands up, and walks over without hurry. The piles are adjusted. The counting resumes. No leaf is treated as late. None are scolded for falling too soon or staying too long. Each one is accepted exactly where it is found, added to the count without judgment. The adult feels a subtle unease. So much of life is spent correcting timing, being early, being late, missing the moment, trying to arrive exactly when expected. Watching the child, the adult realizes how deeply that concern has taken root. The child does not share it. For them, every leaf belongs. Some days there are more, some days fewer. The number is not a measure of success. It is simply a way of noticing what is already there. As the sun lowers, the light in the courtyard shifts. Shadows stretch, colors soften. The piles of leaves lose their sharpness, becoming shapes rather than objects. The child finishes counting and sits back on their heels, satisfied. They do not announce the total. They do not record it. The counting is complete because the moment is complete. You can feel the simplicity of that settling into you. The permission to stop when something feels done, even if it doesn't produce a result that lasts. The courtyard remains quiet. Soon someone will sweep the leaves away. The piles will disappear. The number will be forgotten. But the act of counting, of paying attention without urgency, will linger, carried gently into the evening. When the courtyard is swept later that evening, the child is no longer there. The leaves are gathered quickly, efficiently. Dry ones crackle as they are pushed together. Softer ones cling briefly to the ground before giving in. The piles the child made disappear without resistance, reduced to a single heap and carried away. Nothing remains of the counting, and yet something remains. The adult who watched earlier notices a quiet shift as the broom moves across the stone. The usual impatience, this should be done faster, cleaner, better, does not arrive. Instead, there is a calm acceptance of the work as it unfolds. Each stroke of the broom mirrors the child's earlier rhythm. One motion, then another, not rushed, not delayed, just steady. The adult realizes that the counting was never about the leaves. It was about attention, about allowing each small thing to exist fully before letting it go. The child did not rush to the end because there was no end to reach, only the process. That understanding settles gently. How often do you measure your days by what remains at the end? By what can be pointed to, recorded, remembered? How rarely do you allow yourself to value the quiet acts that leave no trace? The child's counting offers another way to give full presence to what appears even when it will soon be gone. To accept that some moments exist only to be noticed, not preserved. Later, as night deepens, the courtyard looks unchanged, clean, empty, ordinary. Anyone passing by would assume nothing of note happened there. That is how most meaningful moments live. Unmarked, unwitnessed.
They pass quietly through time, leaving their influence not on the world, but on the way we move through it. You may feel that influence now, a soft easing around the idea of timing, a release from the constant measuring of progress. A reminder that not everything needs to arrive at the right moment to belong. Some things are right simply because they are here. As sleep approaches, the image of the child returns briefly. The slow gathering of leaves,
the patient counting, the acceptance of change without resistance. Then it fades. The leaves are gone. The courtyard is quiet. And the night holds what remains. In a narrow street, where the buildings leaned slightly toward one another, there was a small shop with a faded wooden sign. The paint had peeled long ago, leaving only the faint outline of a clock and a name no one remembered. Inside that shop lived a man who repaired broken clocks. He was not known for speed. Customers learned quickly that if they brought a clock to him, they would not get it back the same day or even the same week. He never promised a time. He never hurried his hands. What he did promise without saying it aloud was attention. The shop smelled faintly of dust metal and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with clocks in every condition imaginable. Some stood tall and proud, though silent. Others lay open, their inner workings exposed like delicate bones. A few ticked softly as if practicing how to speak again. Every morning the man opened the shop just after sunrise. He brewed a small pot of tea, set it near the window, and stood still for a moment, listening. Tick, no tick, tick. He did not start working immediately. He waited until he could hear the rhythm of the room itself. When he finally chose a clock to work on, he carried it to the central table, as if lifting something alive. He spoke to it quietly, not words exactly, but sounds of reassurance, as though reminding it that there was no urgency. This particular morning, a woman entered the shop holding a small clock wrapped in cloth. "It belonged to my father," she said. "It stopped the night he died." The man nodded and accepted the clock without question. He did not ask how long ago that had been. He did not ask whether she wanted it fixed quickly. He only asked one thing. "Has it been dropped?" "For hunt." The woman shook her head. He unwrapped the clock, slowly revealing a simple face with worn numbers and a cracked glass cover. The hands were frozen at an ordinary time, nothing dramatic. Not midnight, not dawn, just somewhere in between. The man placed it among the others and returned it to the shelf. "I'll take care of it," he said. Days passed. The woman returned once, then again, always seeing the clock untouched on the shelf. Each time she felt a flicker of irritation rise in her chest. Each time she swallowed it. On the 7th day, she arrived to find the man sitting at the table, the clock open before him. He was not fixing it. He was listening. His eyes were closed. His fingers rested lightly near the gears, not moving. The woman stood silently, unsure whether to speak. After a long moment, the man opened his eyes. "It's not broken," he said. The woman frowned. "But it doesn't run." "Yes," he replied calmly. "That is different." He explained nothing further. Instead, he began to clean the clock, slowly removing dust, straightening what had bent, loosening what had tightened too much over time. He replaced nothing. He forced nothing. When he finally wound it, he did not turn the key all the way. Just enough. The clock hesitated. Then quietly, it began to tick, not loudly, not confidently, but steadily. The woman felt something loosen inside her chest that she had not known was still clenched. The woman stood very still as the clock continued to tick. Each sound seemed to land somewhere deep inside her, not loud enough to startle, not soft enough to ignore. Tick, tick. "How long will it last?" she asked finally. The man considered the question carefully, as if it were about more than the clock. "That depends," he said, "on whether you let it rest." She didn't understand at first. Most people didn't. They expected instructions about winding schedules or careful handling. Instead, he wrapped the clock again and handed it back to her. "Put it somewhere quiet," he said. "Not where you will watch it." She paid him, thanked him, and left, carrying the clock as gently as if it might bruise. For several days, She followed his advice. She placed it on a shelf in the hallway, away from her bed, away from the kitchen noise, away from the places where time usually shouted at her. Sometimes as she passed, she heard it ticking. Sometimes she didn't. She resisted the urge to check. On the fourth night, she dreamed of her father. He was sitting at a table repairing something small and mechanical, just as he had when she was a child. In the dream, he looked up and smiled, but said nothing. The sound in the room was not his voice, but a steady ticking. When she woke, the house felt different. Not lighter, just less tight. A week later, she returned to the shop. "The clock is still running," she said, "but sometimes it slows." The man nodded. "That's normal. For clocks," she asked. "For people," he replied. She watched as he adjusted another clock on his table, one that had clearly been repaired many times before. Its surface bore scratches and mismatched screws, evidence of previous attempts to force it back into usefulness. "People bring me clocks because they think they are broken," he continued. "Most of them are only exhausted." She frowned slightly. "What's the difference?" "A broken thing resists," he said. "An exhausted thing simply stops asking to be pushed." He held up the worn clock and tilted it so the light caught its face. This one was wound too tightly for years. Every time it slowed, someone turned the key harder. Eventually, it learned that stopping was the only way to survive. The woman felt a quiet recognition stir within her. "What happens if someone keeps forcing it?" she asked. "It keeps stopping," he said. "Sooner each time." She thought of her own days, how quickly she tired now, how shallow rest had become, how even silence felt crowded. Before she could say more, a young man entered the shop carrying a large modern clock. He spoke quickly, already apologizing for being late, already asking how long the repair would take. The clockmaker listened patiently, then asked the same question he always asked first. "Has it been dropped?" The young man hesitated. "Not exactly. It just stopped." The clockmaker nodded and accepted the clock. "It will take time," he said. The young man sighed, disappointed but unsurprised, and left. The woman turned back to the clockmaker. "You never promise a deadline," she said. "No," he agreed. "Deadlines belong to running things." She smiled faintly at that. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Why clocks?" she asked. "Why not something simpler?" The man looked around his shop at the ticking and silent shelves, at the small sounds of patience. "Because time," he said slowly, "is the one thing everyone tries to control, and the first thing that leaves when we do." That night, the woman slept more deeply than she had in months. The clock in the hallway ticked, then paused, then ticked again. And for the first time, she did not wonder whether it was still working. The bell was supposed to ring at dawn. That was the rule written nowhere but understood by everyone. Each morning, just before the sun reached the tops of the trees, the sound of the bell would move through the village, low and steady, marking the beginning of the day. People timed their lives around it. They woke when it rang. They opened doors when it rang. They began work when it rang. On the morning it did not ring on time, the village noticed immediately. At first there was confusion. People woke to light without sound. Doors opened hesitantly. A few waited, standing still, as if the bell might arrive late but still claim authority. It did not. The monk who was responsible for the bell realized his mistake only when the sun was already well above the hills. He had slept more deeply than usual, his body heavier, his breath slower. When he woke, the silence startled him. He moved quickly, embarrassed, climbing the narrow steps to the bell tower. He felt the weight of the error settle into his chest. The bell rope was still. The village was already awake without him. He hesitated. For a moment, he considered not ringing it at all. The time had passed. The bell would be wrong now, out of place, a reminder of failure rather than guidance. But habit is a powerful thing. He pulled the rope. The bell rang. Its sound traveled through the village, late and unmistakable. It echoed off walls, moved across fields, entered open windows. People paused mid-motion, surprised by the familiar tone arriving when it no longer belonged. Some frowned, some shook their heads, some laughed quietly and returned to what they were doing. The bell rang exactly as it always had. Only the moment was different. The monk stood still, listening. He waited for irritation to rise, for complaints to follow. None came. The village adjusted without comment. The day continued. Later, when the monk descended, an old woman stopped him near the well. "You rang late today," she said. "Yes," he replied, ready to apologize. She smiled. "It reminded me that time still moves without us." He did not know what to say. All day the thought stayed with him. How easily the village adapted. How little the bell controlled despite how central it felt. How quickly people learned to move forward without waiting for permission. That evening, the monk returned to the tower. He stood beside the bell hand, resting on the rope, and understood something he had never questioned before. The bell did not begin the day, it only accompanied it. And sometimes accompaniment arrives a little late. That night, the village did not speak about the bell. No one gathered to discuss the delay. No one complained about routine being broken. The evening unfolded as it always did. Lamps lit, fires burned low. Voices softened as darkness settled. Yet something subtle had shifted. The monk noticed it in the quiet spaces. People lingered longer at doorways. Conversations ended without hurry. The rhythm of the village felt less bound to signals, more attentive to light, to shadow, to the body's own sense of time. The monk returned to his room and sat on the floor listening. Without the pressure of correcting his mistake, the silence felt different. It was not empty, it was spacious. He realized how tightly he had been holding the responsibility of the bell, as if the day itself depended on his precision. Sleep came easily. In the morning he woke before dawn. The sky was still dark but not heavy. He dressed quietly and climbed the bell tower steps again, slower this time. When he reached the top, he did not touch the rope immediately. He waited. He watched the horizon shift, the faint line of light spreading upward. He listened to birds beginning their calls, unsynchronized, imperfect, alive. The village was already stirring, some waking earlier, some later, each according to their own need. Only then did he pull the rope. The bell rang. This time it was early. The sound traveled outward, gentle and steady. People heard it and smiled, some amused by the change, some not noticing at all. Doors opened, feet moved, life continued without adjustment. The monk felt no embarrassment. Instead, there was relief. He understood now that the bell was not a command. It was an offering, a sound placed into the morning, free to be used or ignored. Later that day, a young novice asked him, What happens if you ring it wrong again? The monk thought carefully before answering. Then the day will still happen, he said. The novice frowned. So why ring it at all? The monk smiled. Because some people like walking with a sound beside them. The novice considered this, then nodded, satisfied. As weeks passed, the monk no longer worried about perfect timing. Some days the bell rang slightly early, some days slightly late. Occasionally it did not ring at all when storms passed through and the tower was unsafe. Each time the village adapted, and slowly something else happened. People stopped waiting for the bell to begin. They began listening inward instead, waking when rested, pausing when tired. The bell became what it had always been meant to be. A companion, not a ruler. One evening, the old woman from the well passed the monk again. "You seem lighter," she said. "I stopped trying to hold time still," he replied. She nodded, pleased. Time doesn't like being held. That night, as the monk prepared to sleep, he thought of the late bell, the early bell, the missing bell. None of them had broken the village. They had only revealed something already true. Life does not wait for signals. It moves when it moves. And when guidance arrives late or early or not at all, the day still finds its way forward. The bell would ring again tomorrow, or it wouldn't. Either way, the morning would come. The old bus stop stood at the edge of town, half forgotten and rarely used anymore. Its metal roof was faded by sun and rain. The bench beneath it scratched with names that no one remembered carving. In the early evenings, when the sky softened into pale blues and slow-moving clouds, one man came here every day at exactly the same time. No one knew his name. He arrived before dusk, always 5 minutes early, and sat upright on the bench with his hands folded loosely in his lap. He did not look at his phone. He did not read. He did not seem to be waiting impatiently. He simply sat, breathing calmly, as if the act of being there was complete in itself. People passed by without paying much attention. Teenagers on bicycles, commuters driving home, a woman walking her dog. At first glance, the man looked like someone waiting for a bus that never came. But if you watched closely, you would notice something unusual. When a bus did pass the road, he never stood, never waved, never checked the route number. He wasn't waiting for transportation. Across the street, in a small convenience store, a young cashier noticed him day after day. During quiet moments, she would glance through the glass doors and see him sitting there, unmoving like part of the landscape. One evening, curiosity finally overcame her hesitation. When her shift ended, she crossed the street and approached the bus stop. "Excuse me," she said gently, not wanting to startle him. "Are you waiting for someone?" The man turned to her slowly. His face was lined not with bitterness but with something softer, like a calm riverbed shaped by time. He smiled a small and honest smile. "Yes," he replied. The answer surprised her. She glanced down the empty road. "They're very late," she said, half joking. He nodded. "They always are." She waited for him to explain more, but he did not. After a pause, she asked, "Who are you waiting for?" The man looked back toward the road where the sky was now fading into gentle gray. "My younger self," he said quietly. The cashier laughed at first, thinking he was teasing, but when she saw his expression, her laughter faded. There was no irony in his voice, no sadness either. "I come here," He continued, "Because this is where I used to wait for the bus every evening after school. I stood right here carrying dreams that felt much larger than my body." She listened, unsure why his words felt so heavy and so light at the same time. "I was always in a hurry back then," he said, "always thinking that life would start later, after I grew up, after I succeeded, after I became someone else." He paused, letting the evening air settle around them. "But the person I was back then," he went on, "he believed in simple things. He thought kindness mattered more than winning. He thought rest was not laziness." Somewhere along the way, I stopped listening to him. The cashier sat down beside him without thinking. The bench creaked softly under their combined weight. "So you come here to remember?" she asked. He nodded again. "Not to regret," he said carefully. "Just to remember. And to forgive." She felt a quiet tighten in her chest, the kind that comes when something true is spoken aloud. As the streetlights flickered on one by one, the man stood, bowed his head slightly toward the empty road, and picked up his coat. "He never shows up," she said softly. The man smiled warmer this time. "He already did," he replied. "I just needed to be still enough to notice." He walked away, slowly leaving the bus stop empty once more, glowing gently under the street light, waiting for no one and everyone at the same time. That night, the cashier did not sleep easily. She lay in bed listening to the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, replaying the man's words again and again. "My younger self." The phrase echoed softly in her thoughts like a bell struck gently and left to vibrate. The next evening, she found herself closing the store a few minutes early, something she rarely did. Almost without deciding, she crossed the street and sat on the same bench at the bus stop. The air was cool, carrying the smell of distant rain. She looked down the road, half expecting the man to appear again. He didn't. Instead, there was only the quiet rhythm of passing cars and the soft glow of the streetlight above her. For the first time, she noticed how peaceful the place felt when she wasn't rushing anywhere. How the stillness wasn't empty but full. She remembered herself at 16, standing at her own version of a bus stop, counting minutes, dreaming of escape, believing that happiness lived somewhere else. She remembered how impatient she had been with the present, how often she told herself, "This isn't it yet." A bus passed by its windows, lit like small moving rooms. She watched it go without standing, understanding now what the old man had meant. Days turned into weeks. Sometimes she came to the bus stop after work. Sometimes she didn't. But something had shifted. When customers grew rude or impatient, she felt a little more space inside herself before reacting. When she went home tired, she allowed herself to rest without guilt. One evening, long after she had stopped expecting it, she saw the old man again. He was already sitting there when she arrived. His posture relaxed, his gaze resting gently on the road. She felt a quiet relief, like meeting an old friend whose presence required no conversation. "You came back," she said. "So did you," he replied. They sat together without speaking for a while. The silence felt natural, not awkward. Eventually she asked, "Do you still wait for him?" The man nodded. "But not the way I used to." He turned toward her. "At first I came here because I felt I had betrayed that younger version of myself. I thought waiting was a kind of punishment." He smiled faintly, "But now it feels more like an invitation." "An invitation? To what she asked. To listen, he said. To slow down. To remember that life isn't something that starts later. She felt those words settle deep inside her, heavy and comforting at once. I spent years chasing the idea of becoming someone, he continued. But peace didn't arrive when I succeeded. It arrived when I stopped running away from who I already was. A light breeze moved through the bus stop, rustling a piece of paper near their feet. The streetlight hummed softly overhead. I think he added, "We don't really lose ourselves. We just stop sitting still long enough to hear ourselves speak." The cashier looked down at her hands, then back up at the road. "Do you think it's ever too late?" she asked. The man shook his head slowly. "It's only ever too loud," he said. "Never too late." After a while, he stood just as he always did and adjusted his coat. Before leaving, he turned back to her. "Thank you," he said. For what she asked. For sitting, he replied. She watched him walk away, his figure gradually blending into the evening. The bus stop returned to silence. But now when she sat there alone, she understood that waiting did not always mean longing for what was missing. Sometimes it meant allowing what had always been there to finally arrive. And in that quiet, she felt something gentle and unmistakable. She was already home. Every morning, the old clockmaker unlocked his shop before the sun fully rose. The street was still quiet, then wrapped in a pale blue light that softened the edges of buildings and slowed the world. His shop sat between a closed bakery and a tailor who no longer took new customers. The sign above the door had faded so much that most people walked past without noticing it. Inside, the air smelled of oil, old wood, and time itself. Clocks filled the space from floor to ceiling. Wall clocks, mantel clocks, pocket watches, and wristwatches lay open on velvet-lined trays. Some ticked steadily. Others stood silent, frozen mid-breath. To the clockmaker, none of them were broken. They were simply waiting. Each morning, he brewed a small pot of tea, sat at his workbench, and listened. To an outsider, it might have seemed like nothing was happening. But the clockmaker could hear everything. The uneven rhythm of a pendulum slightly off balance. The faint hesitation before a second hand moved. The subtle difference between a clock that was tired and one that was merely confused. He had learned long ago that rushing a clock only made it worse. One rainy afternoon, a young man pushed open the shop door. Water dripped from his jacket onto the worn wooden floor. He looked around with impatience, eyes flicking from clock to clock. "Do you fix watches?" the young man asked. "I listen to them," the clockmaker replied. The young man frowned, then pulled a sleek modern watch from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "It's losing time," he said. "I need it fixed quickly." The clockmaker picked it up carefully as though it were fragile, not in form but in spirit. He held it close to his ear, closed his eyes, and remained still. Seconds passed. The young man shifted his weight. "So, what's wrong with it?" The clockmaker lowered the watch. "It's been pushed too hard," he said. "That's impossible," the young man replied. "It's barely a year old. Age has little to do with wear," the clockmaker said gently. "Pressure does," the young man laughed. "It's a watch. It doesn't feel pressure." The clockmaker smiled but said nothing. He opened the back of the watch, revealing its tight, gleaming interior. Everything inside was compressed, efficient, exact. "Who do you wear this for?" the clockmaker asked. The question caught the young man off guard. What do you mean? Timepieces reflect their owners, the old man said. Some are worn for remembrance, some for beauty, some for patience. He looked up. And some are worn as weapons. The young man crossed his arms. I wear it because I'm busy. The clockmaker nodded. That is what I mean. He worked slowly, loosening a single internal spring by the smallest degree. His hands moved with confidence but never haste. If I tighten it further, he said, it will seem more precise for a while. But soon it will break. He paused. If I loosen it too much, it will fall behind. He looked at the young man again. Balance is not about speed. Rain tapped softly against the shop window. The young man's shoulders relaxed without him noticing. How long will it take? He asked, quieter now. The clockmaker considered the watch, then the man. It will take exactly as long as it needs. For the first time, the young man did not argue. He sat down. The young man sat quietly as the clockmaker worked. At first, he checked his phone out of habit. No new messages, no emergencies. After a moment, he placed it face down on his knee, then slipped it back into his pocket altogether. The ticking around him felt different now. Not demanding, not sharp, but steady, almost reassuring. You don't have many customers, he said at last. Those who need speed go elsewhere, the clockmaker replied without looking up. Those who need time usually find me. The young man watched the old hands move. Each motion seemed deliberate, as if the clockmaker were having a conversation not only with the watch, but with the space around it. I'm always late, the young man said suddenly. Or early. Never just on time. The clockmaker nodded. Most people aren't late for life, he said. They're late for themselves. The words landed softly but stayed. Outside, the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. The light through the window shifted, turning warmer, more amber. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, visible only because the world had slowed enough to notice them. Here, the clockmaker said, placing the watch back on the counter. It will keep time now. The young man picked it up, surprised by how ordinary it looked. He held it to his ear. The ticking was quieter than before, less urgent. What did you change? He asked. Nothing essential, the clockmaker replied. I only gave it room to breathe. The young man frowned. But won't it fall behind? It may, the clockmaker said calmly. Sometimes it will. Sometimes it will be ahead. But it won't break itself trying to be perfect. The young man stood, hesitated, then reached for his wallet. No charge, the clockmaker said. That doesn't seem fair. The old man smiled. Fairness is not always measured in money. The young man nodded, slowly slipped the watch onto his wrist and headed for the door. Just before stepping outside, he turned back. What happens to the clocks that stop completely? He asked. The clockmaker looked around his shop. They rest, he said, until someone remembers them. The bell above the door chimed softly as the young man left. That evening, the clockmaker closed his shop later than usual. He sat alone in the dim light, listening as the many clocks continued their gentle work. None of them agreed perfectly with one another, and yet together they created a kind of harmony. Across town, the young man paused on a sidewalk he usually rushed past. He glanced at his watch, then at the sky streaked faintly with the last colors of sunset. For once, he did not adjust his pace. He walked on. The watch ticked, not faster, not slower, just enough. The man who repaired umbrellas worked at the corner of a narrow street, where rainwater always gathered. His shop was small, barely wide enough for a counter, a stool, and a rack of umbrellas in various states of disrepair. Some had bent ribs. Some had torn fabric. Others looked perfectly fine, but refused to open when asked. On clear days, the shop was almost invisible. But when rain arrived, people appeared. They came in hurried clusters, shaking water from their coats, holding umbrellas like wounded birds. The man greeted each customer the same way, with a quiet nod and an unhurried manner that seemed out of place in bad weather. One afternoon, a woman rushed in just as the rain intensified. Her umbrella had collapsed completely. Fabric, twisted metal rods tangled together. "It broke in the middle of the street," she said, breathless. "I need it fixed right now." The man examined the umbrella carefully. He ran his fingers along the bent ribs, pressed the release button, then shook his head gently. "This one doesn't want to protect you anymore," he said. The woman stared at him. "That's ridiculous. It's an umbrella." The man smiled faintly. "So are many promises." She sighed, clearly annoyed. "Can you fix it or not?" "Yes," he said. "But it will never open the same way again." She hesitated. Outside, the rain showed no sign of stopping. "I don't care how it opens," she said. "I just don't want to get soaked." The man nodded and began his work. He didn't rush. He loosened the twisted ribs one by one, straightened what could be straightened, and replaced what could not. He stitched a small patch where the fabric had torn, choosing thread slightly darker than the original color. "Why not match it exactly?" the woman asked, watching despite herself. "Because it's already different," the man replied. "Pretending otherwise only weakens it." The rain tapped steadily against the window. Other customers came and went. Some left umbrellas behind, deciding they weren't worth saving. The woman stayed. When the man finished, he handed the umbrella back to her. It opened, but not smoothly. One side rose slightly slower than the other. The patched fabric was visible, unmistakable. She frowned. "It looks uneven." "Yes," the man agreed, "but it will hold." She stepped outside and opened it fully. The rain slid off the fabric in quiet streams. No leaks, no collapse. She stood there longer than necessary, letting the rain fall around her. "It works," she admitted. "It always did," the man said. "It just needed help in a different way." She paid and turned to leave, then stopped. "Do you fix umbrellas that haven't broken yet?" she asked. The man looked at her carefully. "Those rarely come in," he said. "Why not?" "Because people don't notice the strain until the storm," he replied. The woman nodded slowly, as if storing the answer somewhere private. As she walked away, the rain softened slightly, though the sky remained gray. She did not adjust her grip on the umbrella. She let it lean uneven and honest above her head. Behind her, the man returned to his stool, listening to the rain and waiting not for storms, but for those who finally admitted they were standing in one. The woman returned 3 weeks later. This time the rain arrived, slowly announced by a darkening sky rather than thunder. She stepped into the umbrella shop without urgency, closing the door carefully behind her. The man looked up from his workbench and nodded as he always did. "The patch is holding," she said, lifting the umbrella slightly. "I know," he replied. She smiled, surprised. "How umbrellas tell you when they are struggling," he said. "They rarely complain when things are fine." She glanced around the shop, noticing details she had missed before. The faint scars on repaired fabric, the subtle differences between ribs that had been replaced and those that had not. None of the umbrellas were perfect. All of them were usable. "I used to throw them away," she said quietly, "the moment they failed me." The man did not look up. "Most people do." She leaned against the counter. It made me think, she continued, "about how many things I've discarded just because they changed." He paused, needle suspended in midair. "And what did you find?" "That I was tired of starting over," she said. "Tired of pretending nothing ever bends." Outside, rain began tapping gently against the glass. The sound was steady, patient. "I noticed something else," she added. "Since the repair, I don't walk as fast when it rains." The man smiled just barely. "That's good," he said. "Running teaches umbrellas bad habits." She laughed softly, then fell silent. After a moment, she reached into her bag and placed a second umbrella on the counter. This one was older. The handle was worn smooth. The fabric was thin in places, almost translucent. "It still opens," she said. "But I feel like it won't for much longer." The man examined it carefully. He pressed the release. The umbrella opened with effort, as if reluctant. He nodded. "It's tired," he said, "but not finished." "Can you fix it?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, "but you must accept that it won't protect you from everything." She considered this. "I don't need that anymore," she said. He worked in silence. As he replaced a weakened rib, he said, "People think protection means avoiding discomfort. It doesn't. It means staying present while weather passes." The rain outside grew heavier, then lighter again, as if practicing restraint. When he finished, he handed the umbrella back. It opened slowly, deliberately. It felt lighter than before. She held it with both hands, testing its balance. "Why do you do this work?" she asked. The man wiped his hands and looked around the shop. "Because storms don't ask permission," he said. "And people deserve something that meets them where they are, not where they wish they were." She nodded. As she left, rain had nearly stopped. The street glistened, reflecting the soft light of the afternoon. She did not open either umbrella. She carried them both at her side, feeling the damp air on her skin. Behind her, the man returned to his stool. He listened. Not for rain, but for footsteps, unhurried ones approaching the door. Every evening at exactly 6, the old woman placed 2 cups on the small wooden table by her window. One cup was always filled with tea. The other remained empty. From the outside, her apartment looked ordinary, one of dozens stacked along a quiet street. But inside, the room carried a particular stillness, the kind shaped by long habits and careful pauses. The woman moved slowly, not because she was weak, but because she had learned that speed often erased details worth keeping. She had once been known as someone who talked endlessly. Now she listened. At 6 o'clock, the street below softened. Shops closed their doors, footsteps became fewer. The city exhaled. She sat in her chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes resting on the empty cup. Her neighbor, a young man who lived across the hall, noticed the ritual one evening when he passed her open door. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I hope I'm not intruding." She looked up and smiled. "You're not," she said. "I was expecting silence." The young man laughed awkwardly. I see you do this every night." She gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit if you like." He did. He glanced at the 2 cups. "Are you waiting for someone?" She considered the question carefully. "I am sitting with someone," she said. The answer confused him, but he didn't press. "My husband used to come home at 6, she continued. "Every day without fail. Even when he was late, he was only late together." The young man nodded, unsure what that meant. "He's been gone for 7 years, she said, her voice steady. But 6 o'clock stayed. She lifted the teapot and poured tea into the empty cup just a little, then stopped. The steam curled upward and disappeared. "I don't imagine him sitting here," she said. "I don't speak to ghosts. I simply make room for what shaped me." The young man shifted in his chair. "Doesn't that make it harder?" he asked. She shook her head. Ignoring it was harder. Outside, a bus passed, its lights sliding briefly across the wall. "I used to fill the evenings with noise," she went on. "Television, music, phone calls I didn't enjoy. Anything to avoid the quiet." And now he asked, "Now the quiet keeps me company," she said. He stared at the empty cup. "I don't think I could do that," he admitted. "Sitting with something that's not there." She smiled gently. "It is there," she said. "Just not the way you expect." She reached for her cup and took a slow sip. "Loss doesn't disappear," she continued. "It changes shape. If you don't give it a place, it spills into everything else." The young man thought of his own evenings, how he avoided his apartment, how he stayed out late, just to feel tired enough not to think. "I stay busy," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "That's another kind of noise." They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. At 6:30, she stood and carried both cups to the sink. She washed them carefully, dried them, and returned them to the shelf. "Thank you for sitting," she said. The young man stood too. "Thank you for the tea," he replied. As he left, he noticed something he hadn't before. The empty cup had never been empty at all. The young man did not return the next evening, nor the one after that. But on the 3rd night, just before 6, he found himself slowing his steps in the hallway. He checked his phone, then slid it back into his pocket, without unlocking the screen. When he reached the woman's door, it was already open. 2 cups sat on the table again. He paused at the threshold, unsure whether to announce himself. Before he could decide, she looked up. "You're right on time," she said. He smiled, surprised by how relieved he felt. "I didn't want to interrupt." "You aren't," she replied. "You're participating." He sat across from her this time, without being invited. The room felt familiar now. The quiet no longer pressed against his chest. It seemed to make space instead. "I thought about what you said," he admitted. "About giving things a place." She nodded, pouring tea into her cup. The other cup remained empty. "I realized I don't give anything a place," he said. "I just keep moving. Movement can be a form of respect," she said, "but only if it has direction." They listened to the street below. Somewhere someone laughed. A door closed. Life continued, indifferent and intimate at once. "Do you ever wish it were different?" he asked carefully. She considered this longer than before. "Sometimes," she said, "but wishing is not the same as needing." She reached for the empty cup and turned it slightly, aligning it with the edge of the table. "I don't sit here because I expect him to return," she continued. "I sit here because this moment shaped me. To rush past it would be dishonest." He absorbed that quietly. My father used to call every Sunday, he said after a while. Even when we had nothing to say, she smiled. Those are the conversations that matter most. He stopped calling years before he died, the young man added. I think that's what hurts more. She looked at him gently. Then perhaps that silence is asking for a chair. The idea unsettled him, and yet something in it felt right. At 6:30, the woman rose as she always did. She washed both cups and placed them back on the shelf. The young man lingered. What happens if one day you don't feel like doing this? He asked. She dried her hands and looked at him. Then I won't, she said simply. Rituals are not chains, they're invitations. That night back in his apartment, he turned off the television before it finished its opening music. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands resting on his knees, listening to the soft sounds of the building settling. It felt uncomfortable at first, then less so. Across the hall, the old woman sat by her window, the table bare, now the cups resting quietly on the shelf. The streetlights flickered on. The day closed itself gently. Neither of them felt alone. Not because something had returned, but because something had finally been allowed to stay. The librarian opened the window every morning before unlocking the front door. It was an old habit, one she had never questioned. The library stood on a quiet street where trees leaned inward as if protecting the building from noise. When the window opened, air carried in the scent of leaves, dust, and something faintly sweet like paper that had learned to breathe. Inside the library was never truly silent. Pages shifted, shelves creaked softly. The building held the echoes of thousands of thoughts once read, abandoned and rediscovered. The librarian believed that books remembered their readers. Late one afternoon, a boy came in alone. He looked no older than 15. His backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. He didn't head for the fiction shelves or the computers. Instead, he wandered slowly as though unsure what he was allowed to touch. Are you looking for something? The librarian asked gently. I don't know, the boy said. I just didn't want to go home yet. She nodded. That's a valid reason. He smiled faintly and drifted toward the back where the least borrowed books lived. The ones no longer listed on school reading lists. The ones with cracked spines and handwritten notes in the margins. He picked one up at random and opened it. May I ask what you're reading? The librarian said. The boy glanced down. I'm not, he admitted. I'm just holding it. She understood. Some books are meant to be held before they're read, she said. The boy lowered himself into a chair by the window. Outside, leaves moved slowly in the afternoon breeze. My mother used to read to me, he said suddenly. She stopped a long time ago. Did she stop liking stories? The librarian asked. No, he said. She stopped having time. They sat with that for a moment. The boy turned a page, not reading the words, just tracing the lines with his eyes. Do you ever feel like you missed the part where life tells you what comes next? The librarian smiled. Often, she said. That's why I like libraries. They don't rush endings. She walked to a nearby shelf and pulled down a thin book with no cover illustration, only a faded title. She placed it on the table beside him. This one hasn't been borrowed in 20 years, she said. Is it good? He asked. It depends on when you read it, she replied. He opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed soft with age. What if I don't understand it? He asked. Then it will wait, she said. Books are patient. The boy nodded. He didn't check the time. He didn't reach for his phone. When the library lights flickered, signaling closing time, he looked up startled. "I didn't notice it getting dark," he said. "That means the book noticed you," the librarian replied. He checked the book out and held it against his chest as he left. After the door closed behind him, the librarian returned to the window and opened it again. The air carried in the sound of distant traffic softened by trees. She believed that some people came to libraries to learn. Others came to remember. And a few, without knowing it, came to sit quietly until they were ready to turn the page. The boy returned the following afternoon. This time he didn't hesitate at the entrance. He pushed the door open with a quiet confidence, as if the space already recognized him. His backpack was heavier now, filled with notebooks and something unspoken. The librarian noticed him immediately. "You finished it," she said, not as a question. He nodded. "I didn't read it straight through," he admitted. "I kept stopping." "That's usually how it works," she replied. He sat in the same chair by the window. Outside, the light was different today. Less golden, more muted. Autumn was beginning to thin the air. "The book didn't tell me what to do," he said. "It didn't fix anything." The librarian smiled. "Good." He looked at her confused. "Isn't that what books are supposed to do?" "They can," she said, "but the ones that stay with us usually don't." He opened the book again, this time, turning to a page he had folded carefully. "This part," he said, pointing. "It didn't make sense until I read it a second time." She leaned closer but didn't look at the words. "That means it was waiting for you to catch up." The boy exhaled slowly. "I think I've been waiting too," he said, "for something to tell me who I'm supposed to be." "And did it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but it made me feel like it's okay not to know yet." The librarian straightened, satisfied. They sat quietly, listening to the soft shuffle of pages from somewhere deeper in the building. A man coughed. A chair scraped gently across the floor. "Do books ever get tired?" the boy asked suddenly. "Yes," she said. "When they're opened too quickly, or closed too hard." He ran his fingers along the book's spine. "This one feels calm. It has lived a long time without being asked to perform," she replied. When closing time came again, the boy didn't seem surprised. He placed the book on the desk instead of returning it to the shelf. "I don't want to keep it," he said. "I think it belongs here." The librarian nodded. "That's very considerate." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "Of course," she said. "We open the windows early." After he left, the librarian returned the book to its place on the shelf. She noticed something she hadn't before, a small note written in careful handwriting on the inside cover. "If you're reading this, take your time." She closed the book gently. That evening, she locked the library and stood by the window looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere the boy was walking home. The book's words no longer in his hands, but not entirely gone. The librarian believed that was how stories worked best. They didn't give answers, they gave space. And sometimes that was enough to help someone keep going slowly, deliberately, until the next chapter revealed itself on its own. The shoemaker repaired shoes at the end of a long alley where people rarely looked down. Most passed through quickly, eyes fixed ahead, unaware of the uneven stones beneath their feet. The shoemaker noticed them all. He could tell how a person lived by the way their shoes arrived on his counter: scuffed heels, worn soles, hurried stitching done elsewhere. His shop was narrow and deep lit by a single window near the ceiling. Sunlight fell in a thin stripe across his workbench, illuminating leather thread and small tools arranged with quiet care. One morning, a woman arrived carrying a pair of walking shoes in a paper bag. "They hurt," she said simply. The shoemaker examined them without comment. He pressed the soles, flexed the leather, and turned them upside down. "They've gone far," he said. She nodded. "Too far, maybe." He gestured to the stool. "Sit." As he worked, she watched his hands. They moved slowly, not from age, but from attention. Every stitch seemed intentional, as if placed with memory rather than force. "Do people ever bring shoes that don't need fixing?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied. "They usually don't stay long." He loosened a seam near the arch. "Shoes remember where they've been," he said. "When they're ignored, they begin to protest." The woman smiled faintly. "I think I do that too." The shoemaker glanced up, acknowledging the truth without responding to it directly. She studied the walls where old shoes hung like quiet trophies. None were polished. All showed signs of use. "Why keep them?" she asked. "They remind me," he said, "that nothing meant for walking stays untouched." He replaced the inner lining with something softer, adjusting the shape subtly. The work was careful, almost tender. "I used to walk everywhere," the woman said after a while. "Then I stopped." "Why?" he asked. "I told myself I was too busy," she said. "But I think I just forgot where I was going." The shoemaker nodded, threading his needle. "Feet know before the mind does." When he finished, he placed the shoes gently on the counter. "They'll feel different," he said. "Not lighter, just less resistant." She slipped them on and stood. Her posture shifted almost immediately. "They don't hurt," she said, surprised. "They weren't supposed to," he replied. She reached for her wallet. "Wear them slowly," he added. "Let them learn your pace again." She paused. "What if I don't walk far?" He smiled. "Then they'll be grateful for every step." As she left, the shoemaker returned to his bench. Outside, footsteps passed through the alley, some hurried, some unsure. He listened, not to where people were going, but to how they carried themselves getting there. The woman did not return the next day, nor the day after that, but the shoemaker did not expect her to. Shoes, like decisions, needed time to settle into their new shape. On the fourth morning, rain softened the alley. The stones darkened and the air smelled faintly of damp leather and dust. The shoemaker was polishing a pair of children's shoes when he heard careful footsteps approach, slower than most, deliberate, as if testing the ground. The woman appeared at the entrance, the same paper bag folded neatly under her arm. "You walked," he said, not as a question. She smiled. "I did." She sat without being asked and removed the shoes. Their soles were marked again, but differently now, more evenly worn, less strained. "I didn't go far," she said. "Just around the neighborhood. Then a little farther. Then I stopped counting." He turned one shoe over, running his thumb along the edge. "They're listening," he said. "I noticed something," she continued. "When they stopped hurting, I slowed down. And when I slowed down, I remembered things. Like what he asked. The way the street smells in the morning. Which houses still leave lights on. How my breath sounds when I'm not rushing." She paused. I didn't realize how much I'd been bracing myself. The shoemaker nodded. "Pain often teaches us posture," he said. "Comfort teaches us honesty." She laughed quietly, then grew serious. "I always thought rest meant stopping completely," she said. "But this feels different." "Yes," he replied. "Rest can also mean moving without resistance." She placed the shoes back on her feet but didn't stand. "What happens when they wear out again?" she asked. "They will," he said calmly. "And when they do, you'll know where to find me." She hesitated. "And if I don't want them fixed next time, then you'll have learned something from them already," he said. She nodded, satisfied. Before leaving, she gestured toward the old shoes on the wall. "Do you ever miss the places they've been?" The shoemaker followed her gaze. "No," he said. "They've already given me their stories. Holding on longer would only make them quiet." Outside, the rain had slowed. The woman stepped carefully into the alley. Her stride unforced her shoulders lower than before. The shoemaker watched her go, then returned to his bench. That afternoon, a man arrived with shoes worn thin at the toes. Another with heels collapsed inward. Each pair told a familiar story: too much forward motion, not enough pause. The shoemaker worked as he always did, adjusting, softening, listening. He believed that walking was not about distance. It was about agreement between the body, the ground, and the moment. As evening approached, the alley grew quiet. The shoemaker closed his shop and stood for a moment in the doorway. He looked down at the stones beneath his own feet, uneven but steady. Then, unhurried, he walked home, each step neither wasted nor forced, carrying him nowhere in particular, and exactly where he needed to be. The man who sharpened knives worked behind a modest stall in the early morning market. He arrived before dawn when the air was still cool, and the stalls were only outlines in the half-light. He unfolded his table, laid out his stones, and poured water carefully into a shallow bowl. By the time the market woke, he was already listening to the sound of steel against stone. Most people noticed him only when they needed something. A dull knife was inconvenient, dangerous even. It slipped instead of cutting, crushed instead of slicing. People brought him their knives with frustration written into their faces, as if the tools themselves had betrayed them. One morning, a woman placed a kitchen knife on his table and sighed. "I don't know what's wrong with it," she said. "I press harder and harder, but it just won't do what I want." The sharpener picked up the knife and ran his thumb gently along the blade, careful not to cut himself. "It's tired," he said. She frowned. "It's metal." "Yes," he replied. "But it remembers pressure." He placed the blade against the stone and began moving it slowly, rhythmically. Water darkened where the metal met stone. The sound was soft, almost soothing. "You shouldn't press so hard," he continued. "Sharpness doesn't come from force." The woman watched, arms crossed. "That's not how my life works," she said. He smiled faintly. "It works that way whether we notice or not." She glanced around the market. Vendors called out prices. Someone laughed. A cart rolled by, wheels rattling over uneven ground. "I cook every day," she said after a while. "I used to enjoy it. Now everything feels like effort." The sharpener didn't look up. "Dull tools make honest work exhausting," he said. He switched stones, using a finer one now. His movements slowed further. "Why does it take so long?" she asked. "Because if I rush," he said, "the blade will be sharp for a moment, then fail you again." She fell quiet. As he worked, She noticed how little waste there was in his process. No dramatic sparks, no grinding noise, just patience, repetition, and attention. "Do people ever bring knives that are too far gone?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Usually the ones that were abused the most." "What happens then?" "They don't get sharper," he said. "They get thinner. Eventually they disappear." The words lingered between them. When he finished, he rinsed the blade and handed it back to her, handle first. "Try it," he said. She pressed the blade gently into a tomato he had set aside. It sliced cleanly without resistance. She inhaled sharply. "I didn't push at all." He nodded. "You didn't need to." She paid him and hesitated before leaving. "How often should I sharpen it?" she asked. "Before you feel the need to force it," he said. She looked at the knife in her hand, then at her own fingers. "That might be harder than it sounds." He met her gaze. "That's why people come back." As she walked away, the market grew louder, faster. The sharpener returned to his stones, listening again to the quiet truth hidden in simple work. He believed most people didn't need sharper lives. They needed gentler hands. The woman returned the following week. This time she did not look frustrated. She placed the knife on the table carefully, almost respectfully, as if acknowledging something that had changed. "It still works," she said. The sharpener nodded. "Of course it does. I noticed something," she continued. "When the knife is sharp, I don't tense my shoulders. I don't brace myself." She paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't realize how much I'd been fighting everything." The sharpener dipped the stone into water again, though he had not yet touched the blade. "Dullness teaches us bad habits," he said. "We learn to compensate instead of listening." She watched the market stir around them. The noise felt less abrasive today, as if she was standing slightly apart from it. "I started applying that at home," she said, "with other things." He raised an eyebrow, and I stopped forcing conversations, stopped pushing through exhaustion. She smiled faintly. Some things improved. Others fell apart. The sharpener finally picked up the knife. "That's normal," he said. "Force holds fragile things together longer than they should stay." He tested the blade against the stone lightly, not to sharpen but to listen. "This one doesn't need much today," he said. "Just a reminder of what she asked." "That sharpness fades quietly," he replied. "Not all at once. If you wait until frustration arrives, you've waited too long." She nodded slowly. "I think that's what happened to me." He worked briefly, only a few careful strokes. When he finished, he handed the knife back again. "There," he said. "Now don't undo it." She laughed softly. "I'll try." Before leaving, she asked, "Do you ever sharpen your own knives?" "All the time," he said. "And do they ever go dull?" He smiled. "Often." That evening after the market closed, the sharpener packed his tools and walked home through streets that were losing their urgency. At his small kitchen table, he prepared a simple meal. He cut vegetables slowly, appreciating the ease of each slice. He noticed when the blade began to hesitate. Not enough to frustrate him, just enough to be honest. He set the knife down. Some habits were easier to maintain when you respected their quiet warnings. Across town, the woman cooked dinner without rushing. She noticed when her hand tightened, when her breath shortened. When it did, she paused, not to correct herself, but to release. The knife glided. The meal tasted better, though nothing about the recipe had changed. The sharpener believed that sharpness was not about perfection. It was about attentiveness, about noticing resistance early, about understanding that pressure was a response, not a solution, and in the gentle rhythm of maintaining what was already good, both the blade and the hand learned something rare and valuable: how to work without wounding themselves. The man who repaired radios lived above his workshop in a building most people thought was abandoned. From the street, the place looked silent. The paint had faded. The sign in the window had not been changed in years. But inside, the air was alive with sound, soft, static, distant voices, fragments of music drifting in and out like half-remembered dreams. The radio repairman believed that nothing truly stopped speaking. Some things simply fell out of tune. Every morning, he brewed coffee strong enough to fill the room with bitterness, then turned on the small lamp above his workbench. He never played music while he worked. He preferred to listen to the radios themselves, to the way they searched for signal even when they failed. One afternoon, a teenage girl climbed the narrow stairs and knocked hesitantly on the open door. She held a portable radio close to her chest. "It doesn't work anymore," she said. "It only makes noise." The man smiled gently. "That means it's still trying." She frowned. "I don't want it to try. I want it to work." He took the radio and turned it slowly in his hands. The plastic was scratched, the antenna bent slightly out of shape. "Who did you listen to?" he asked. "My grandfather," she said. "He used to fix it and tell me stories while it played." The man nodded. "And now," she swallowed, "he's gone." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened the back of the radio and studied its worn interior. "Sometimes," he said, "quietly voices don't disappear. They hide behind interference." She sat on the edge of a chair watching as he adjusted a small dial inside. Static hissed, then softened. A fragment of music emerged, thin, distant, but real. Her breath caught. "That song," she whispered. "He used to hum it." The man adjusted the dial again. The music faded, replaced by a voice speaking in a language neither of them fully understood. "Radios don't choose what comes through," he said. "They only decide how clearly they listen." She looked at him. "Can you make it stay?" He shook his head gently. "No, but I can help it find the signal again." He worked slowly, carefully realigning the antenna and tightening connections weakened by time. His hands moved with familiarity as if he had done this work many times before, for radios and for people. "Do you listen to radios at home?" she asked. "All the time," he replied. "Mostly the broken ones. Why, they tell the truth more often," he said. "Clear signals can lie. Static rarely does." When he finished, he closed the radio and turned it on. The static remained, but now it shifted more gently, allowing sounds to rise and fall naturally. "It won't be perfect," he said. "It never was." She held it again, pressing it close. "It sounds alive." "That's because you're listening," he replied. She paid him and stood to leave, then hesitated. "What if it stops again?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Then you'll know where to bring it," he said. "And you'll know that silence doesn't always mean absence." As she descended the stairs, the man returned to his bench. He tuned another radio, listening carefully. Somewhere in the static, something familiar waited to be heard. The girl did not return for several weeks. The radio repairman did not worry. Radios, like people, needed time to settle after being heard again. In the evenings, after the light outside dimmed and the street below grew quiet, he sat at his window with a cup of coffee gone cold. He listened to the city through half-open radios, snippets of distant broadcasts, overlapping voices, unfinished songs. He never searched for a specific station. He let the signals find him. One night, the familiar hum of static shifted. A melody emerged, thin but unmistakable. He recognized it. It was the same tune the girl's radio had found weeks earlier. The notes drifted into the room, uninvited but welcome, then faded again. He did not reach for the dial. Some things he believed should pass through untouched. The next afternoon, the girl returned. She looked calmer, less tightly held together. "It still works," she said, holding up the radio, "but sometimes it's quieter than before." He nodded. "That means you've stopped chasing it." She sat down without being asked. "I listen differently now," she said. "I don't expect him to be there. But when something familiar comes through, I don't push it away." The repairman smiled. "That's how signals survive." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever miss the voices you fix?" "All the time," he replied, "but missing is a kind of listening." She considered that. "I thought silence meant I was losing him again," she said. "Now it feels more like space." The repairman adjusted a radio on his bench, not to repair it, but to quiet it slightly. "Too much clarity can be overwhelming," he said. "Space allows things to arrive gently." She looked at the shelves lining the walls. "Do all of these still speak?" "Yes," he said. "Just not always when we ask." She stood and slung her bag over her shoulder. "I don't think I need it fixed anymore," she said, referring to the radio. "That's good," he replied. "It means it's doing its job." Before leaving, she turned back. "What happens when everything goes quiet?" He thought for a moment. "Then we listen to what remains," he said. That evening, after she left, the repairman turned off the lamps one by one. The room darkened, but the radios continued their quiet searching. He lay down on the narrow bed by the window and closed his eyes. The city spoke in layers: traffic, far away wind between buildings, the faintest echo of music drifting through interference. He did not try to separate them. Across town, the girl sat on her bed with the radio resting beside her. It was silent now. She did not turn it on. She listened anyway. In the quiet, memories surfaced without demand. Not sharp, not painful, just present. The repairman believed this was the true work of tuning, not forcing clarity, not eliminating noise, but learning to sit comfortably with what came through and what didn't. As sleep approached, the radios in the workshop continued their gentle murmur. Signals rose and fell. Voices appeared, then dissolved. And in that shifting soundscape, nothing felt lost, only differently received. The woman who folded paper cranes worked in the corner of a quiet stationery shop. She did not sell them. They appeared gradually, one by one, lining the shelf behind the counter. Some were crisp and sharp-edged. Others were softer, their folds worn smooth by repeated handling. No two were exactly alike. Customers noticed them only after standing still for a while. "What are those for?" someone would eventually ask. The woman always gave the same answer: "They're for waiting." Most people nodded politely, unsure what that meant, and returned to choosing notebooks or pens. But occasionally someone paused. One afternoon, a man in his 30s stood at the counter longer than necessary. He picked up a pack of plain white paper. then set it down again. "You fold them yourself?" he asked, nodding toward the cranes. "Yes," she replied. "How long does one take?" She considered this. "As long as it needs." He smiled a tired smile. "I don't have much patience." She met his gaze. "That's usually who asks." He laughed softly, then grew quiet. "My wife is in the hospital," he said. "There's a lot of waiting." The woman nodded. She reached behind the counter and handed him a square of paper. "Sit," she said simply. He hesitated, then sat at the small table near the window. The light there was gentle, filtered through frosted glass. She folded slowly, deliberately, letting him watch. Each crease was precise, but unforced. "Don't rush the corners," she said. "They remember pressure." He tried to follow her movements. His first crane collapsed awkwardly in his hands. "It's wrong," he said. She shook her head. "It's honest." He tried again. The paper resisted, then yielded. The shape began to emerge. "Why cranes?" he asked. "Because they're made from something flat," she said, "and still learn how to stand." He absorbed that quietly. They folded in silence for a while. Outside, footsteps passed. Somewhere, a phone rang. Inside, the sound of paper moving was steady and calming. When he finished his crane, leaned slightly to one side. "It won't stand straight," he said. She placed it gently on the shelf with the others. "Neither do most people," she replied. He watched her add it to the collection. "What happens to them?" he asked. "They stay," she said, "until the waiting changes." He stood feeling lighter than when he arrived. "Can I take one?" he asked. She shook her head. "Number?" He smiled. "I thought so." As he left, she returned to folding. Another crane joined the others, quiet and imperfect. That evening, after closing the shop, she stood before the shelf and adjusted a few cranes that had tilted during the day. She believed that waiting was not empty time. It was shape being formed, and sometimes all anyone needed was a small, deliberate act to remind them that even stillness was doing something. The man returned to the stationery shop 3 days later. This time, he did not browse the shelves. He walked straight to the small table by the window and sat down without speaking. The woman looked up from behind the counter and nodded once, acknowledging his presence without interrupting the quiet. She slid a square of paper toward him. They folded together in silence. Outside, the afternoon moved slowly. A delivery truck passed. Someone laughed on the street below. Inside, the paper held their attention completely, each crease arriving when it was ready. "My wife woke up today," the man said eventually. The woman did not look up. "That's good," she said. "They don't know much yet." He continued, but she opened her eyes. She squeezed my hand. His voice caught slightly, then steadied. "I didn't know what to do with that moment." The woman folded another crane and placed it on the shelf. "You stayed," she said. "That's usually enough." He nodded. I realized something he said after a while. When I was waiting at the hospital, I kept wishing time would pass faster. But when she woke up, I wanted everything to stop. She smiled gently. Waiting teaches us what we're afraid to miss. He finished folding and placed his crane beside the others. This one stood more evenly than the first. "They look fragile," he said, gesturing to the shelf, "but they don't fall easily." "No," she replied, "because they were folded with care." He leaned back in his chair. "I thought waiting was useless," he admitted. "Now it feels like preparation." She nodded. "Stillness doesn't mean nothing is happening." The man stood and thanked her. then paused. "Will you keep folding them?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "as long as people keep waiting." He left quietly. As weeks passed, the shelf filled slowly. Some cranes arrived crisp and sharp. Others leaned, their paper softened by hands that trembled slightly. Each one marked a moment when someone had chosen to pause instead of rush. One evening after closing, the woman removed several cranes from the shelf. She unfolded them carefully, smoothing the paper flat again. The creases remained faint but visible. She placed the blank squares back into a drawer. Waiting, she believed, was not something to collect. It was something to move through. The next morning, she folded new cranes. Across town, the man sat beside his wife's bed, holding her hand. The machines hummed softly. He did not count the minutes. He folded a small square of paper he had brought with him, creasing it slowly, deliberately. The crane leaned slightly when he finished. He smiled. For the first time, the waiting did not feel empty. It felt shaped. The man who repaired benches worked in a small park that most people passed through without stopping. The park sat between two busy streets, a narrow strip of trees and worn paths that offered just enough quiet to be ignored. Joggers cut through it quickly. Office workers crossed it while checking their phones. Few noticed the benches lining the paths, and fewer still thought about who kept them usable. The bench repairman noticed everything. He arrived early each morning with a small toolbox and a thermos of coffee. He walked the paths, slowly testing each bench with his hands. A loose board here, a splinter there, a wobble that only revealed itself when someone leaned back too far. He believed benches held stories. Late one morning, a woman sat down heavily on a bench near the center of the park. The bench creaked but held. She sighed, staring at the ground. The repairman watched from a distance. When she didn't move for several minutes, he approached. "Is it comfortable?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "Oh, yes. It's fine." He pressed gently on the bench beside her. "It could be better," he said. She smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." He chuckled softly and knelt, tightening a bolt beneath the seat. The bench steadied almost imperceptibly. "I come here every day," she said, surprising herself by speaking. "I tell myself it's just a shortcut, but I always stop here." He nodded. "That one gets a lot of pauses." "Why benches?" she asked. "Why not fix something more important?" The repairman considered this. "People sit when they don't know where to go next," he said. "Those moments deserve support." She absorbed that quietly. As he worked, she noticed how careful he was not to rush, even though others passed nearby. He didn't apologize for taking time. He didn't hurry when footsteps approached. "I don't like sitting still," she admitted. "It makes me think." He tightened the last bolt and stood. "That's usually why people avoid it." She laughed softly, then fell silent again. "Do people ever thank you?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied. "But benches don't need recognition. They just need to hold." She tested the bench again, leaning back. It felt different now, firmer, more reliable. "I've been feeling unsteady," she said almost to herself. The repairman nodded as if he had heard this many times before. "Most people don't notice instability until they stop moving," he said. She stood slowly. "Thank you," she said. "For the bench." He tipped his hat slightly. "For the pause," he replied. As she walked away, she realized her shoulders felt lower, her breath easier. The bench remained behind her, quiet and waiting. The repairman moved on to the next one, tapping the wood thoughtfully. Another small adjustment. Another unseen kindness. He believed the world asked too much of people while offering too few places to rest. And so, each day he repaired the places where stopping was allowed. The woman returned to the park the next afternoon, though she told herself she hadn't planned to. She walked the long way this time, circling past the trees instead of cutting straight through. When she reached the bench near the center, she slowed, then sat. The wood felt steady beneath her, solid without being rigid. She noticed that she leaned back more easily now. The repairman was already there a few paths away, kneeling beside another bench. She watched him work for a while before he noticed her. "Still comfortable?" he asked when he approached. "Yes," she said, "more than I expected." He nodded. That's how support should feel. Quiet. They sat for a moment without speaking. Around them, the park moved, gently. Leaves rustled, footsteps past a distant siren faded into the background. "I didn't realize how rarely I stop," she said finally. "Not just physically. In my head." The repairman rested his hands on his knees. "Stopping asks questions," he said. "Movement postpones them." She looked down at her shoes. "I've been postponing a lot." He didn't ask what. Instead, he reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small piece of sandpaper. He smoothed a rough edge beneath the bench where a hand might rest. "Most benches break slowly," he said. "A little strain every day. No one notices until something gives." She felt the truth of that settle into her chest. "Do you ever fix one that can't be saved?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Sometimes the wood is too tired. Then I remove it completely. That seems sad." He shook his head. "It makes room for something new. Keeping a bench that can't hold weight is more dangerous than having none at all." She considered this, thinking of the places in her own life that wobbled when leaned on. A child ran past them laughing, then doubled back and climbed onto the bench beside her. The bench held easily. The child hopped down and ran off again without noticing. "That's why I do this," the repairman said softly. "So no one has to think about whether it will hold." The woman smiled. "I wish more things were like that." "So do I," he replied. As the afternoon stretched on, she stood to leave. This time she did not rush. She paused, then sat again, just for a moment longer. "I think I'll come back," she said, "even when I'm not tired." The repairman smiled. "That's usually when benches are most useful." She walked away, her pace unforced. The repairman returned to his work. He tightened another bolt, replaced another board, tested another seat. Each bench responded differently. Some needed only a small adjustment. Others required patience and time. As evening approached, the park grew quieter. The repairman packed his tools and took one last walk along the paths, pressing lightly on each bench as he passed. They held. Satisfied, he sat on the last one near the exit, poured the remaining coffee from his thermos and rested. For a few minutes, he did nothing. And in that stillness, the park did exactly what it was meant to do. It held him too. The woman who restored photographs worked in a small studio above a closed tailor shop. The staircase leading up was narrow, the steps worn smooth by decades of use. Most people passed the building without noticing the faded sign near the door. but those who did climb the stairs usually arrived carrying envelopes held carefully against their chests. Inside the studio was quiet and softly lit. Photographs lay spread across large tables, some curled at the edges, some faded almost beyond recognition. The woman moved among them with steady hands, wearing thin gloves that dulled her touch just enough to protect what remained. She did not rush her work. One afternoon, a man arrived with a single photograph sealed inside a plastic sleeve. He looked nervous, as if unsure whether he should be there at all. "I don't know if this can be saved," he said. She examined the photograph without responding immediately. The image was faint, the faces blurred by time and moisture. Two figures stood side by side, smiling at something outside the frame. "It won't look the way it used to," she said finally. "That's all right," he replied. "I don't remember it that way anymore." She nodded and invited him to sit. As she worked, she explained nothing. She adjusted light, applied gentle cleaning solutions, and slowly coaxed details forward: an outline of a shoulder, the suggestion of a smile, the curve of a hand. "What made you bring it now?" she asked eventually. The man leaned back in his chair. "I kept it hidden," he said. "I was afraid of what I'd lose if it changed." She smiled faintly. "Photographs don't hold memories," she said. "They invite them." He watched as the image grew clearer, though never sharp. "My mother took it," he said. "She's gone." The woman nodded, continuing her work. "Then this is less about saving the picture," she said, "and more about giving it permission to age with you." He swallowed. "I never thought of it that way." She worked carefully, avoiding overcorrection. Some scratches remained. Some fading was left untouched. Why not fix everything, he asked. "Because perfection erases history," she replied. When she finished, she placed the photograph between two sheets of glass and slid it across the table. The image was softer now, but warmer, more present. He stared at it for a long moment. "It feels honest," he said. She nodded. "That's usually enough." He paid her and stood slowly. Before leaving, he hesitated. "Do you ever get tired of looking at other people's pasts?" She removed her gloves and met his eyes. "I'm not looking at the past," she said. "I'm looking at what people choose to keep." As he left, she returned the studio to its quiet rhythm. Another photograph waited on the table. Edges curled, asking not to be restored to what it was, but to what it could still become. The man returned a week later. This time he did not bring anything with him. He stood in the doorway for a moment, as if checking whether he was allowed to arrive empty-handed. The woman looked up from her table and nodded, recognizing him without surprise. "I thought I was done," he said. But something stayed unsettled. She gestured to the chair. "That usually means the photograph finished its work," she said. He sat folding his hands together. "I put it on my desk," he said. "Not where it used to be. Somewhere I'd see it every day." And she asked. "At first I avoided looking at it," he admitted. "Then one morning I didn't." She listened without interrupting. "It didn't bring back a clear memory," he continued. "No exact moment, no dialogue, just a feeling, like being near someone who knew me before I knew myself." The woman nodded slowly. "That's what remains when details fade," she said. "Recognition." He leaned back, exhaling. "I realized I wasn't afraid of losing the image," he said. "I was afraid of letting it change me." She smiled gently. Change is the proof that something mattered. He looked around the studio. Do people ever ask you to make the pictures look younger? He asked. All the time, she replied. They want brighter colors, sharper lines, fewer marks. And do you? He asked. Only when the photograph asks for it, she said. He frowned slightly. How can a photograph ask? She gestured to the table where another image lay waiting. Some resist cleaning. Some fall apart if you push too far. Others reveal more when you let them be imperfect. She met his eyes. People are the same. The man nodded, the idea settling into him. I found another photograph at home, he said. I didn't bring it. Why not? I think I'm not ready to see it. Yet, he said. But now I know I don't have to hide it either. She smiled, approving. Outside, the afternoon light shifted, catching dust in the air. The studio felt warmer, though nothing had changed. Do you ever restore your own photographs? He asked. She considered this for a moment. I used to, she said. Then I realized some memories need to remain soft. He stood feeling lighter than when he arrived. Thank you, he said. For what? For not fixing it too much, he replied. After he left, the woman returned to her work. She lifted a photograph from the table and held it up to the light. It showed a group of people standing close together, their faces partly obscured by age. She adjusted it carefully, restoring just enough to let the image breathe. She believed photographs were not meant to preserve the past. They were meant to remind us that memory, like light, changes depending on how we allow it in. As evening approached, she turned off the lamps one by one. The studio grew dim, but the photographs remained visible in their own quiet way. Nothing had been erased. Everything had been softened, and in that gentle clarity, the woman continued her work, helping people learn that keeping something did not mean keeping it the same. Every evening at exactly 7, the old man walked to the end of the pier. No one knew when the habit began. Some said it started after his wife died. Others believed he had done it long before, back when the pier was louder, when boats still lined the water and laughter drifted across the bay. The truth mattered less than the rhythm itself. 7 o'clock, every night. He walked slowly, not because he was weak, but because he was careful. Each step felt intentional, as if the wooden planks beneath his shoes deserved acknowledgement. He carried nothing in his hands. No phone, no bag, just himself arriving again. At the very end of the pier, he stopped. There was a bench there, weathered by salt and sun. Sometimes he sat, sometimes he didn't. Tonight, he remained standing, gazing out over the darkening water. The sea was calm but never still. Small waves pressed gently against the pilings below, repeating the same motion without urgency. The man watched them as if they were speaking a language he once understood more clearly. Years ago, he had worked on the water, not as a fisherman, but as someone who repaired things others depended on. Nets, motors, hulls cracked by storms. He was known for patience, for fixing what could be fixed, and knowing when something had reached its end. That skill had not translated easily to life. After retirement, the days felt loose, unstructured. Time expanded without asking what it should become. He filled it with errands at first, then television, then silence. Nothing held the weight it used to. Until one evening, without planning to, he walked to the pier. He didn't come with a purpose. He simply stood there, letting the wind move through him instead of around him. When he returned home, he slept more deeply than he had in months, so he returned the next night and the next. People noticed him eventually. Children riding bikes slowed down when they passed him. A woman walking her dog nodded politely each evening. He never spoke first, but he always returned the nod. One night a boy approached him. "What are you looking at?" the boy asked, leaning against the railing. The man considered the question carefully. "Time," he said. The boy laughed. "You can't see time." The man smiled. "You can if you stay long enough." The boy stayed for a few minutes, then ran off bored. But the man remained. He was not waiting for anything to happen. He was practicing being present for what already was. On this particular evening, as the sky deepened into blue and the first stars appeared, the man felt something unfamiliar rise within him. Not sadness, not longing, something quieter. Gratitude, perhaps. Not for the past, not even for the present as a concept, but for this exact moment that asked nothing of him. The water reflected the sky imperfectly. Lights from the shore trembled on the surface. Nothing was symmetrical, nothing was complete, and yet it was enough. For the first time in years, the man realized he was not trying to return to who he used to be. He was learning how to remain. The nights grew cooler as the season shifted. The old man noticed it first in his hands. The air carried a sharper edge now, especially near the water. Some evenings he wore a thin jacket. Other nights he welcomed the cold, letting it remind him that he was still here, still able to feel. The pier changed with the weather. Fewer people passed by. The woman with the dog stopped coming. The children disappeared earlier as daylight faded faster. But the man remained faithful to the hour. 7 o'clock. One evening he arrived to find the bench occupied. A young woman sat there, her shoulders slightly hunched, staring at the sea with the same still intensity he had carried for years. She noticed him immediately and stood up. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't know anyone used this bench." The man shook his head. "It's not mine." She hesitated, then sat back down. He joined her, leaving space between them as if silence itself required room to breathe. They didn't speak for a long while. The sea moved, the sky darkened. The quiet felt complete, not awkward. Finally she spoke. "I come here when my head won't stop." The man nodded. "That's why most people come." She glanced at him, surprised. "And you?" "For the opposite reason," he said. "So my head can start again." She smiled faintly as if unsure whether he was joking. He wasn't. They sat together until the wind picked up and she stood to leave. Before walking away, she turned back. "Thank you," she said, though nothing specific had been exchanged. The man watched her go, feeling no need to name what had happened. That night, walking home, he realized something subtle had shifted. For years, the pier had been a place of quiet repair. A space where he could stand without explanation. But now it was also a place that could be shared, briefly, without being diminished. He had believed presence was a solitary practice. He was wrong. Weeks later, the man missed a night. Not by choice. A storm rolled in suddenly heavy rain, lashing the town wind howling through the streets. He stayed home listening to the weather press against the windows. At 7 o'clock, he felt an absence sharper than expected. The next evening, he returned. The pier was damp, the wood darkened by rain. The sea was rougher, restless. He walked to the end as always and stood in the wind, and something became clear. He was not here to escape life. He was here to meet it stripped of noise. The pier had never been about memory or habit or grief. It had been about learning how to stand inside uncertainty without reaching for distraction, about letting moments pass without trying to keep them. The man understood now that the ritual would not last forever. One day he might stop coming. His body might decide for him, or life might call him elsewhere. And that was fine, because the lesson had already settled deep within him. Stillness was not the absence of movement. It was the decision to stay. As the waves struck the pilings below, steady and unafraid of repetition, the man breathed slowly, evenly. 7 o'clock. Nothing to fix, nothing to chase, just the quiet courage of being here again. The train station had not changed in decades. The paint along the beams was chipped, the benches smoothed by countless waiting bodies, the clock above the platform always running a few minutes slow. People complained about it sometimes, but no one ever tried to fix it. Somehow the station felt more honest that way. Every evening at the same hour, a man came to sit beneath that clock. He never rushed. He arrived early, bought nothing, spoke to no one, and chose the same bench near the far end of the platform. From there, he could see both tracks clearly stretching away into the distance like parallel thoughts that never quite met. He did not wait for a specific train. That was the strange part. At least that was what he told himself. Years earlier, he had worked on the railways, back when schedules mattered and delays felt personal, back when time had felt like something to manage rather than something that simply passed through him. Now retired, he found himself drawn back to the station without any clear reason. The sounds soothed him. The distant hum of engines, the metallic echo of footsteps, the low murmur of announcements no one fully listened to. It was a place where movement and stillness coexisted naturally. Trains arrived, trains departed, and nothing demanded that he follow. One evening, as twilight slipped through the high windows, a boy sat beside him. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. His legs swung nervously, shoes tapping the bench in uneven rhythm. He clutched a small backpack to his chest as if afraid it might disappear. The man noticed the boy glancing repeatedly at the tracks. "First time waiting alone?" the man asked gently. The boy nodded. "My mother's on the late train." The man smiled. "They always feel later when you're watching the clock." The boy studied him for a moment. "Are you waiting for someone too?" The man hesitated. "No," he said, then after a pause, "Not anymore." The boy seemed satisfied with that answer. They sat quietly, watching lights appear in the distance, disappear again, reappear somewhere else. The station breathed around them. Eventually, the boy asked, "Why do trains always leave?" The man chuckled softly. "Because if they didn't, they'd stop being trains." The boy thought about that, brow furrowed. Does everything have to leave? The question lingered longer than the man expected. Not everything, he said at last. "Some things stay with us, just not in the way we expect." A train thundered through the station, without stopping, wind rushing past them, pulling loose papers along the platform. The boy held his backpack tighter. "Is that her train?" he asked. "No," the man said calmly. "That one wasn't meant for here." Minutes passed. Then another set of lights appeared, slower this time. The train eased into the station, with a familiar sigh of brakes and metal. The boy stood up immediately. "There," he said, relief flooding his face. Before running toward the doors, he turned back. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" The man looked up at the clock, its hands still slightly off. "Yes," he said. I think I will." The boy nodded, smiled once, and disappeared into the crowd. The man remained seated long after the train departed. For the first time in years, he admitted the truth to himself. He wasn't waiting for trains. He was waiting to remember how to let things arrive and leave without holding on too tightly. The station lights dimmed slightly as night settled in, and the clock kept its imperfect time. The night train had gone. The platform emptied in its usual unceremonious way. No finality, no clear ending. Just a gradual thinning of footsteps and voices until the space felt wider than before. The man remained on the bench, hands resting loosely on his knees, breathing in the quieter air that followed departure. This was the moment he liked most. Not the arrival, not the reunion, but the space that opened afterward. He had learned slowly and reluctantly that life was full of platforms like this, moments after something important had already passed, when nothing demanded action and nothing needed explanation. For many years he had resisted those spaces. When his wife passed, he filled the silence with noise, radios playing in empty rooms, television murmuring through the night, conversations that went nowhere just to avoid being alone with memory. When his work ended, he filled his days with errands he didn't need, obligations no one asked of him. Movement without direction. He thought staying busy meant staying alive. But here at the station he had discovered something different. The trains did not mourn what they left behind. They did not cling to the tracks they had already crossed. They moved forward, not out of urgency, but because movement was their nature. The man leaned back against the bench and closed his eyes. He imagined his life as a series of arrivals he once feared and departures he never prepared for. Jobs ending, children growing distant, conversations that had mattered once now only echoes. For a long time, he had mistaken holding on for love, but holding on had only tightened his chest. Letting go, he was learning, felt more like opening a hand than losing something. The station clock ticked on, unbothered by human reflection. He wondered if time itself had always been kind, and it was only his resistance that had made it feel cruel. A breeze moved through the platform, carrying the faint scent of oil and night air. Somewhere far down the tracks, a signal light blinked steadily, patient and unconcerned. The man opened his eyes. Tomorrow he would come back again. Not because he had to, not because he was waiting for anyone in particular, but because this place reminded him how to sit without demanding answers, how to be present without performing, how to let life pass through him without trying to trap it in explanation. He stood slowly, joints stiff but steady. As he walked toward the exit, he glanced back one last time at the empty platform. It didn't feel lonely. It felt complete. Outside, the city had settled into its quieter rhythm. Streetlights cast soft halos on the pavement. A distant train horn echoed once, then faded. The man took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, he felt no urgency to follow any particular track. Some nights were for arriving, some nights were for leaving, and some nights like this one were simply for sitting with what remained. He walked home at an unhurried pace, carrying nothing but the gentle understanding that nothing in life was meant to stay forever, and that this somehow made everything more precious. Now that the stories have gently settled, There is nothing more you need to follow. Nothing more you need to understand, nothing more you need to remember. You've already done enough for today. If your eyes are still open, you can let them close whenever they feel ready. If they're already closed, you don't need to check. Just notice how the room feels quieter now. Not silent, just softer. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand attention. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Not a deep one, just an easy one, and let it fall out of you naturally. There's no rhythm you need to follow. Your body already knows how to breathe without instruction. Notice the weight of your head, how it rests, how it's supported. You don't have to hold it up anymore. Your neck loosens, your shoulders sink. That small tension you didn't realize you were carrying begins to melt away on its own. Nothing is pulling you forward right now. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing needs an answer tonight. If thoughts appear, let them drift by like distant train lights, visible for a moment, then gone. You don't need to climb aboard. Just watch. Imagine yourself walking slowly along a quiet path at night, not rushing, not headed anywhere important. The air is cool but not cold, comfortable, still. Each step feels unhurried, as if time itself has decided to walk beside you rather than ahead of you. Above, the sky stretches wide and patient. No stars demanding your attention. No moon performing. Just space. With every step, your body grows heavier, not in a way that feels uncomfortable, but in the way a blanket feels heavy, safe grounding. Your arms rest where they are. Your hands are relaxed. Your fingers no longer gripping anything. You are allowed to be completely unfinished tonight, unproductive, unresolved, undemanding. Whatever you didn't complete today can remain undone.
Whatever conversation lingered in your mind can fade. Whatever worries tried to follow you into the night can stop at the edge of this moment. They don't belong here. This is the part of the night where nothing improves you, nothing fixes you, nothing transforms you. You are already enough for rest. Imagine a soft light somewhere in the distance, not bright, not calling you forward, just quietly existing. You don't need to reach it. You don't need to understand it. You can simply let it be there while you stay exactly where you are. Your breathing slows further. Longer pauses between breaths. Gentler movement in your chest. Your heartbeat settles into a calm, steady rhythm. You don't need to feel it. Just trust that it's there doing its work without asking for your attention. If your mind drifts, that's good. If your thoughts become blurry, that's even better. Sleep doesn't arrive through effort. It arrives through permission. Permission to stop watching. Permission to stop monitoring. Permission to stop holding the edges of consciousness so tightly you can let go now. Imagine the night wrapping around you the way water wraps around a stone, without pressure, without force, just naturally. You sink, not downward but inward, deeper into stillness, deeper into rest. The stories from earlier don't need to be remembered. Their work is already done. They've settled into you in their own quiet way. You don't need to take anything from them. Just rest. If there's a part of you that still feels alert, still listening carefully, still checking whether sleep has arrived, yet you can let that part rest too. It doesn't need to guard the night. Nothing bad is approaching. Nothing urgent is waiting. This moment is safe. The darkness here is gentle, supportive, wide enough to hold you without asking anything in return. Your legs feel warm and heavy.
your feet no longer aware of themselves. Your lower back releases, your stomach softens, your chest rises and falls slowly, effortlessly. Each breath feels like a wave reaching the shore, then quietly retreating. You don't follow it back out, you stay. If sleep begins to blur the edges of this moment, let it. If you lose track of the words, that's exactly where you need to be. Nothing important will be missed. You are allowed to disappear into rest for a while. The night knows how to carry you, and tomorrow, whenever it comes, will meet you without needing preparation. For now, there is only this calm, this quiet, this long, gentle night. Let it take you the rest of the way. Sleep deeply, sleep softly, sleep without holding on. Good night, sweet dreams.